Kofi Good TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Ming of Revolution. Iran refuses to submit. Trump pretends he's willing to talk, but war is in the air. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, World War III is still in the air. I got to get straight into this late breaking news the revolutionaries can use. Trump playing possum. Iran still ready for war. Let's get into the content. Salute.
The situation around Iran continues to be tense. A major war could break out at any moment. So, a few hours ago, Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei made a rather alarming statement. In particular, during his address to the Iranian people, Ali Khamenei warned the United States that any attack on Iran would provoke the outbreak of a real regional war that would affect all countries of the Middle East. At the same time, Ali Khamenei stressed that only Iran will emerge victorious from this war. According to Iran's supreme leader, Tehran does not want to attack other countries, even US allies. However, according to Ali Khamenei, those countries that want to attack and harm Iran will receive a crushing response from the Iranian people. Meanwhile, many Western think tanks have admitted that a military strike against Iran is inevitable. In particular, American military expert and former special assistant to the U.S. President, Michael Allen, expressed confidence that Donald Trump and his team would definitely take some kind of military action against Iran, especially against the backdrop of the brutal suppression of protests in the country. Michael Allen notes that Donald Trump has put American prestige on the line against the current government in Tehran, and that if the United States backs down, it will mean losing face. It is also worth noting the numerous statements by major Western news agencies. In particular, the British Reuters and the American The New York Times, citing their sources in the White House, reported that over the past 10 days, the Trump administration has been discussing a wide range of options for using force on Iran, ranging from targeted strikes against Iranian generals, and ending with the merciless carpet bombing of Iran's missile and nuclear program facilities. Numerous U.S. officials also added oil to the fire during their communication with Western reporters. In particular, they admitted that the buildup of American forces off the coast of Iran is designed not only to have a psychological impact on the current government in Tehran, but also to allow the U.S. president to launch an attack at the most appropriate moment. Simply put, U.S. officials have made it clear that Donald Trump can attack Iran at any moment, even during the negotiation process. However, unfortunately for Donald Trump, everything that happens indicates that in the event of an attack on Iran, the United States risks receiving not only a bloody nose, but also colossal reputational losses. In particular, on January 30th, Iran released footage of the work of its latest Shahed-149 Gaza surveillance combat reconnaissance drones. As it turned out, these Iranian drones were chasing the American aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln as soon as it approached the Arabian Sea. Later, Tehran showed the American aircraft filmed by Iranian drones from very different angles. The most interesting thing is that the air defense systems of the American aircraft carrier strike group didn't even notice the heavily armed Iranian surveillance combat reconnaissance drones. All this has once again proved to the world that American aircraft carriers are real sitting ducks, and that their protection is carried out only by the Star-Spangled Banner and the fear of imminent retaliation in the form of economic sanctions. Simply put, those countries that are not afraid of economic pressure from Washington are ready to sink American aircraft carriers off their coasts without hesitation. As an example, it is worth remembering April 2017, when Trump sent a mighty aircraft carrier strike group to the shores of the Korean Peninsula to put pressure on Kim Jong-un. However, unfortunately for the United States, the North Korean leader was not afraid and accepted the challenge. In particular, he ordered the North Korean army to destroy all American warships in the event of an escalation of the conflict. As a result, Washington decided not to risk it, and withdrew the American aircraft carrier strike group from the Sea of Japan as a matter of urgency. As an example, we can also recall the U.S. military Operation Rough Rider in the Red Sea against Yemen. Even though Yemen does not have any intelligence or targeting, this country managed to damage several American warships, including the aircraft carrier USS Harry Truman. As a result, the United States was forced to flee the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Later, because of this shameful failure, Washington dismissed Vice Admiral Dave Snowden from the post of captain of the aircraft carrier USS Harry Truman. Furthermore, the United States also blamed Russia and China for the failure of the Rough Rider operation in the Red Sea. According to Washington, it was the Russians and the Chinese who allegedly coordinated all the attacks by Yemen's Houthis on American warships. At the same time, Washington has not been able to provide a single piece of evidence for its claims. Well, against this backdrop, a reasonable question arises. If the United States failed to cope with such a poor and technically underdeveloped country like Yemen, how does Washington intend to defeat Iran, whose firepower is considered the most powerful in the Middle East? Furthermore, how does Washington intend to defeat Iran, whose allies openly support Tehran both militarily and economically? In particular, on January 31st, superpowers such as China and Russia sent their warships to the Persian Gulf, where they began naval exercises with the Iranian Navy, directly opposite the American aircraft carrier strike group. All this indicates that in the event of the outbreak of hostilities, the United States will face not only an asymmetric response from Iran, but also a complication of the situation on key sea routes, in the areas of responsibility of superpowers such as China and Russia. By the way, all these decisive actions by Iran and its allies have already produced results. In particular, the U.S. command decided to withdraw an aircraft carrier strike group led by USS Abraham Lincoln from the southern coast of Iran, and send it to the western part of the Persian Gulf. All this indicates that the United States is well aware that Iran possesses very dangerous missiles, capable of destroying the entire American aircraft carrier strike group. Furthermore, on the morning of February 1st, the Israeli Mossad confirmed that the flow of military cargo to Iran from Russia and China has increased significantly over the past 3 days. For example, on January 31st, 5 Russian military cargo planes arrived in Iran at once. In particular, we are talking about 3 Il-124-100 and 2 Il-76TD. An emergency logistics of this magnitude indicates that Russia has begun transferring critical military technology and heavy weapons to Iran. Indeed, numerous Middle Eastern sources have confirmed that Russia has transferred 28 units of modern Mi-28 NME attack helicopters to Iran. It is reported that thanks to these modern Russian helicopters, Iran will finally get rid of the old American Bell AH-1 Cobra attack choppers, as a result of which the military capabilities of the Iranian army will be significantly enhanced. In addition, China and Russia continue to strengthen Iran's air defenses. According to experts, everything that is happening indicates that Moscow and Beijing are trying to provide a first and second-tier air defense dome over Iran, and actually organize a no-fly zone throughout the region.
However, the bad news for the United States and Israel did not end there.
In particular, Israeli intelligence has confirmed that Russia has transferred its latest ballistic missiles to Iran.
In particular, we are talking about the world's most powerful short-range ballistic missile Iskander 1000.
At the same time, Israeli intelligence noted that Moscow allegedly forbade Iran from using these missiles against targets located in Israel. It is reported that these latest Russian missiles will be used only for the sake of targeted strikes on American military bases. Against this backdrop, Middle Eastern think tanks have stated that in the event of the outbreak of hostilities, there is a high probability that the United States and its allies will not only fail to achieve their goals, but will also suffer a crushing defeat from Iran, whose combat potential has increased significantly thanks to China and Russia. All this indicates that Beijing and Moscow are doing everything possible to prevent the United States from changing the regime in Tehran, as the loss of Iran will cause devastating damage to the entire BRICS construction, which is the symbol and main structure of the New World Order.
Iran has agreed to hold talks with the US a day after Donald Trump said he was hoping for a peaceful resolution with the Islamic Republic. This was after the Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei warned of a regional war if the US launched military strikes on Tehran. In today's video, I will discuss this major development and also America's public admission that US spies were indeed instrumental in causing widespread unrest in Iran recently. So please stay tuned. As I explained yesterday, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's unprecedented warning for a regional war had prompted Taco Trump to soften his stand by declaring that he was hopeful of resolving the matter with Iran through talks.
Hopefully we'll make a deal. If we don't make a deal, then we'll find out whether or not he was right.
Now, hours later, Iran has reportedly agreed to hold talks with the US on the question of nuclear program. Iranian Foreign Minister Syed Abbas Araghchi has just told CNN that while Iran was against war, it didn't mean that the country was concerned about war with America.
What I'm concerned of is miscalculations and military operation based on misinformation and disinformation campaigns. It is obvious to us that there are certain elements, certain parties who want to drag President Trump into this war for their own benefits. And I think President Trump is wise enough to make a correct decision.
How can a meaningful negotiations process be jump-started right now?
A meaningful negotiation should be based on trust. And unfortunately, we have lost our trust to the United States as a negotiating partner. We need to overcome this mistrust. There are now some intermediators, some friendly countries in the region who are trying to build this confidence. It is difficult, but they are trying. So I see the possibility of another talk if the US negotiation team follows what President Trump said, to come to a fair and equitable deal to ensure that there is no nuclear weapons.
Trump had recently changed his position to also include Iran's ballistic missile and drone program as part of any future talks. But I had told you from this channel that this would be utterly non-negotiable for Iran. Well, Arakchi has just confirmed that in no uncertain term.
Things like enrichment, things like ballistic missiles, things like proxy forces in the region. I know that the United States has talked about wanting to negotiate about that as well. Is that completely out of the question for you, or is that something you could at least talk about?
President Trump said no nuclear weapons, and we fully agree with that. That could be a very good deal. Of course, in return, we expect sanction lifting. So that deal is possible. Let's do not talk about impossible things.
Iran has also long said that it didn't intend to build nuclear weapons, much to the dislikes of many Iranians and others. But just because Iran has agreed for talks, it doesn't mean the country will agree to any nonsensical demands of the US. Arakchi is likely to meet Trump's Jewish envoy for everything, Steve Witkoff, this Friday. But as Arakchi has said, these talks must be held based on the principles of reasonable and equitable expectations. What does this mean? This means that Iran will not forego its right to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes. The country will never agree to completely abandon its nuclear programs. Iran will agree to a level at which it enriches uranium in exchange for lifting of sanctions. As for not hanging protesters who recently caused carnage in the country, the Islamic Republic has already made it abundantly clear that it never had any intention to execute them. This, however, doesn't mean Mossad and American spies would be spared. Iran is also acutely aware of the US game plan, whereby it publicly pretends to hold talks while launching military airstrikes secretly. This was precisely what Americans had done last June, when Trump talked about holding talks with Iran while quietly also green-lighting Israeli airstrikes. The Islamic Republic is in no mood to be fooled by the same American bluff once again. My sources in Iran are saying that the country is fully prepared for a swift and robust retaliation if the US tries to launch its military aggression against them. The supreme leader yesterday made his intention clear, and the Iranian foreign minister has also now explained what that meant. It means hitting US air bases in the region.
If war starts, that would be a disaster for everybody. In the previous war, we tried hard to limit the scope of war between Iran and Israel. This time, if it is between Iran and the US, since the US bases are spread all over the region, then inevitably, many parts of the region would be involved, engaged, and that could be very dangerous. Our missiles were tested in a real war last time, and we were able to, understand their problems, their weak points, and their strengths. So we learned many lessons from those 12 days of war, and I think we are now very well prepared. But again, being prepared doesn't mean that we want war. We want to prevent a war.
A top Iranian general has now said that the country's military doctrine had changed from defensive to offensive.
Major General Abdurrahim Mousavi has said the review doctrine is based on extensive, unfaltering blitz operations with a focus on crushing and asymmetric military strategies. The general warned that any military action by Iran will be swift and decisive and would upset the United States' calculations. General Mousavi stressed that the Iranian armed forces are fully ready for any confrontation. He said the slightest error by enemies will be a green light to us to take military action. The general further referred to the recent foreign-backed riots in Iran, saying it was a quasi-coup defeated by the people of Iran.
Then Brigadier General Hadri has this to say. He says that Americans would regret if they didn't behave properly.
یک نکته در رابطه با حضور دشمن قداره‌بندی که امروز در آبهای نیلگون خلیج فارس حضور پیدا کرده، میخوام این اخطار رو به نمایندگی از شما و همه رزمندگان عزیز اسلام بهشون بدم که به نفع آمریکایی‌ها هست که با جمهوری اسلامی و با این نیروهای مسلح و قدرتمند نظام مقدس جمهوری اسلامی ایران عاقلانه رفتار نمایند، دچار خطای محاسباتی نشوند. در غیر این صورت قطعاً با رفتار قهرآمیز و بسیار پشیمان کننده ما مواجه خواهند شد.
Meanwhile, the US has once again admitted that its spies were indeed involved in causing unrest in Iran recently. Mike Pompeo, who you know has served as the Secretary of State during Trump's first term as president, made this spectacular confession recently.
President Trump said help is on the way. Iranians went to the street, but help didn't come. Do you think till now the Trump administration lost an opportunity for a regime change during this uprising?
No, I don't think so. By the way, help did come. Lots of help came. You may not see it all. Okay. We may not know about it all, but I'm very confident that the United States is actively trying to do all that it can to support the Iranian people.
Mind you, Pompeo had earlier tweeted about the presence of Mossad and CIA agents. The US is completely exposed now. That's why Trump has to tread very carefully. Any decision to attack Iran would spell disaster for him politically and his country militarily. His popularity is at all-time low because of his brutal action against his own citizens. His gang of ICE agents or ICE terrorists have killed 2 US citizens and injured many by terrorizing them. This is bound to end very badly for Trump in the upcoming midterm polls. Fearing consequences, Trump decides to not go ahead with the war with Iran, then this would be a bad news for Iranian expats. These self-centered, selfish Iranians desperately wanted the bombing of the country that they call their own. These are the people who left Iran and settled abroad to enjoy the comfort of the Western world, but now wants to see Iran destroyed through the military intervention of America. These are primarily supporters of Reza Pahlavi and the rogue settler colony of Israel. That's why you see every single pro-Pahlavi rally in the Western world carry Israeli flags. Iran and the US arriving at a peaceful resolution would be a big slap on the faces of these warmongering supporters of traitor Pahlavi. That's it for me. Thank you very much for your support of this platform and our journalism. If you haven't subscribed to my channel,
Iran is continuing with its drill in the region next to the US aircraft carrier and its striker group, despite the warning that came from the CENTCOM about this drill. The IRGC confirmed that they're going ahead despite these warnings, and the drone carrier that belongs to the IRGC is next to the US aircraft carrier in the region. That's coming just days after that warning came from the CENTCOM, telling Iran to be responsible and be cautious with the drill that they're taking in that area. Why is Iran continuing with this drill? Why are they actually getting closer to the American forces in the region? What will China and Russia do, and how all of this is linked with the talks about potential continuation of talks or renewal of indirect talks between Iran and the United States to try and de-escalate? And should they go towards the path of de-escalation and a deal, will Iran have concessions, or will the United States climb down the ladder with their demands? What will Israel's position be, and what will be the results for Donald Trump? We're going to talk all about this in this video. Now, before we get into this video, make sure you subscribe to newsvpro.com. We've all been facing a lot of propaganda and misinformation. The trust in mainstream media, even on platforms to do with social media and what is called alternative media, is eroding due to misinformation, bias, and propaganda. NewsVPro is a tool that will help you identify all of the bias and propaganda, misinformation all across mainstream media and also on social media as well. NewsVPro includes a video verification tool that helps you also verify videos that are trending on YouTube to do with current affairs. And it also has a bias indicator to tell you exactly how you're being misled and lied to. There's also a podcast generator, should you prefer to listen to podcasts rather than read the news, whether it's a quick brief, daily digest, or deep carrier, and its forces. CENTCOM published the statement warning them, but Iran said we're going to continue with them, regardless of that warning coming from the United States of America. One of the most important statements that we heard, and there were few that we'll be talking about in this video, came from the Foreign Ministry spokesperson of Iran. He addressed multiple topics that are relating to the current escalation between Iran and the United States. More accurately, the increased hostility from the US regime in the region, trying to apply more pressure on Iran. He spoke about multiple subjects, the talks, potentially resuming talks, and that was also confirmed by other Iranian officials, saying that indirect talks could restart again because there have been talks, but these talks were from mediators, and the Iranian side actually supported the efforts that came from Turkey in relation to this these talks and the attempts to de-escalate the tensions. They said that there are actually attempts to damage the Iranian-Turkish ties. He praised Ankara's recent role in erasing regional tensions and warned that some actors seek to undermine regional cooperation, expressing confidence in Turkey's prudent handling of such narratives. He also mentioned a few things that will be important should these indirect talks happen. Nothing's going to take place with Iran's drills, no changes. They're going to continue with their drills. The IRGC, they're going to continue ensuring regional security. The IAEA, they have to commit to their responsibilities and not be a tool in the hands of the United States and other countries too. He highlighted the strategic ties with China and Russia, and they confirmed that they're going to continue with the drill that they're going to be having with Iran. In the meantime, Iran, Russia, and China are not mentioning hardly anything, by the way. They're keeping a high level of ambiguity. But this is one of the key things that may lead to a slight de-escalation. Why? So we had genuine diplomatic concerns and efforts from countries in the region because they don't want escalations. And then we had the pressure on the ground because diplomacy doesn't work on its own. The United States assumed that China and Russia might actually participate at a later stage with their own forces. However, China and Russia sending forces from now clearly sent the message to the United States administration that we're willing to take action earlier on. And that could have been a factor that deterred the US even further. All right, what else did he mention? And how is everything linked together? There are a lot of questions and more questions than answers. Said that any spark would spread. That's something that we've been hearing from the Iranian side. Anything that would escalate or be attacked in Iran will lead to a very large attack. that would go beyond previous expectations. Certain actors pushing the US for endless wars, Israel, clearly. And we will get to how that will affect Israel and the relationship between Israel and the American president, the United States as a whole, and also what will Israel do should the United States go back to another deal that is bad for Israel, because they've been warning. Recently, we've been speaking about Israel warning the United States not to be deceived by Iran, alongside a few other things that the spokesperson mentioned, but these are the most important things. There was another statement made by the senior advisor to the supreme leader of Iran, Ali Shamkhani, who also mentioned that Iran is open to reduce the enrichment of uranium from 60 to 20%, but so long as the other side pays the cost for it. They need to pay the full price for Iran's reduction. And what is Iran in effect doing here? Well, truth of the matter is Iran is showing a very advanced level of diplomacy. Reducing the enriched uranium from 60 to 20% means nothing to Iran. Should Iran want to have, assuming that they don't secretly, a nuclear bomb, fission bomb, Iran would have it. We have more than 10, at least, to say the least. The technology, they have it. The capabilities, they have them. And they will continue to enrich. But they will get a deal with the United States. Said none of the uranium will go outside of Iran. No enrichment will happen outside of Iran. Everything will be here, but we're willing to reduce. We're not willing to give in to the United States and the Israeli demands and lose our control over our uranium, which is very similar to what happened before, during the Obama administration, before Donald Trump left. Okay, will the United States agree to this? There was a similar deal. Donald Trump withdrew before, following Israeli pressure. Donald Trump is saying they need to completely stop their nuclear program altogether, and they need to stop their missile capabilities, and their range needs to be limited to 500 kilometers. These two things, Israel is worried about them, and they're pushing the United States to say what? Oh no, you have to do all of these things, otherwise we're going to attack you. All right. We have a couple of things here, and one of the most important things is deterrence may be working. That's number one. Iran has a drone carrier, is having a drill. China and Russia are already there to send a signal to the United States that we're not going to be standing by here. We're not going to be standing still doing nothing. We will be on Iran's side. And the declaration of a strategic pact that they've had trilaterally between Iran, Russia, and China, that's also very important too. All right. Well, we've had the Epstein files being released. We know who controls the Epstein files, to push him for a war against Iran. Donald Trump has been constantly escalating his tone and his demands from Iran following increased Israeli pressure that always correlated with the release of the Epstein files that Donald Trump is mentioned in very many times. What can Israel do in this situation? The top figures in the Israeli military establishment were just in the United States for a visit. The head of the Israeli army, the head of the military intelligence directorate, several other senior figures in the military establishment. And when they came back, and the chief of staff, Eyal Zamir, had a consultation with the genocide minister. And he briefed him about the details that he got from the United States that relate to Iran. What will Israel do? What if Donald Trump signs an agreement with Iran and it's considered to be a done deal and no attack will go towards Iran. What's going to happen then? Well, if that happens, Israel will lose in this game. Israel will be the biggest loser. Iran will remain an independent country, no interference, defense capabilities, no question. They have a nuclear project and they have nuclear bomb capabilities. And they have a deal with the United States and other countries too, which, by the way, should be the norm. As a matter of fact, none of them should be even talking about Iran's peaceful nuclear program, even if they publicly had a military nuclear program. That's a sense of entitlement and supremacy. But that has been the whole approach of the aging Western establishment, full of supremacy towards other nations, especially Iran. However, Iran, with its deterrence, with its capabilities, with its resilience, with its strategic capabilities, with proven capabilities to conduct attacks and hurt United States assets and potentially completely destroy Israel if they want, they managed to reach this stage. Will Donald Trump go there? Well, we must not forget that first and foremost, this could be theatrics. This could be a move coming from the Trump administration, similar to the previous move before Israel attacked. And they could be, changing roles here. We know the relationship between the United States and Israel. The second scenario, so that's the first scenario, either the US can attack or Israel can attack and then immediately supported by the United States, not against one target, but against very many targets inside of Iran that will cause a lot of damage. Whether they'll attack more nuclear sites, sites to do with the IRGC, civilian buildings, and government institutions, potentially try and target some of the leading figures inside of Iran to cause destabilization, because you can hear from the statements of the American administration officials, help is on the way, help is on the way, continue protesting, because no one is protesting now in Iran. The protest finished, and the rioters were captured anyway. But Lindsey Graham is hoping that he can spark some more riots inside of Iran, because that would be the favorable outcome, of course, having internal turmoil, only for the United States to attack when Iran is in a much more tense position internally. That's why the whole rioting was carefully and strategically calculated and implemented. Police stations, IRGC locations, cases that belong to the government, hospitals wreaking havoc, destabilization that relates to the society as well, mosques, hospitals. All right. That is the first option, that the United States is tricking everyone and is trying to deceive Iran only for them to either attack directly, allow Israel to attack and then participate, or potentially have a mutual attack with Israel. Two, the message has been received. There was already a level of deterrence previously. The United States knew it wasn't capable to defeat Iran, because it wouldn't be enough to have an attack with its air force. Iran is in a more powerful position than it was in June 2025, with more electronic warfare systems, more air defense systems, more missile capabilities, more accurate hypersonic ballistic missiles that can cause a lot of damage to the US aircraft carriers, bases, and Israel as a whole. If Ansarullah in Yemen managed to expel 4 aircraft carriers, just imagine what Iran can do. And now with the additional deterrence being bolstered by China and Russia, the United States says, or will tell Israel too, listen, this is going to lead to World War III. Are we really interested in going there, or, entertaining the idea? That's another argument here. There is likelihood that would happen. Why? Because you can argue that what they have been doing with the support of Zelensky against Russia is an adventure, is a very miscalculated move. that relies on the reasoning and level-headedness of the Russian leadership, the same leadership that they were saying is reckless. Albeit if the United States was attacked in a manner that Russia was attacked in, just imagine what the US would do. The US would go and attack countries that are all across the world for baseless claims. So that's two. They're deterred. That's it. And they're not going to do anything with Iran, and they're going to reach a deal. And it might be just another episode. Maybe they'll try and weaken Iran later on, or they'll just have an all-out deal and just admit that Iran is a pillar now, a pillar in the region, and they're going to continue supporting the resistance, and we can't do anything about that. That's it. Israel is not going to have the upper hand in all of the decision-making process, and Netanyahu, although he has a lot of influence with the Israeli lobby, he can shut up because there's so much we can do. This is the second scenario. The third scenario, Israel would pull the final cards that relate to Donald Trump to force him to go on this war. There is an argument that they already did with the release of the Epstein files. There's a counter argument that says, no, it's actually an internal move meant to have a preemptive element to a potential Israeli release of these files to blackmail Donald Trump or push him to an attack against Iran, because there are elements in the administration who are not completely aligned with the interests of Israel, whether they declare it or not. But Israel would still have an opportunity to release more clear, explicit evidence that is linked with Donald Trump directly, or threaten to do that and then force him to say, well, that's it, we're going to need to have an attack anyway. Assuming the American side wouldn't convince the Israelis that we have explored all options and we sent the aircraft carriers and we really wanted to attack them, but China and Russia sent their naval ships to the region to have a drill with Iran, and they're sending a message and they send them a lot of things, and you will be completely destroyed, we're not going to be able to defend you. And that argument actually works, and Israel will have to bite the bullet, like they're biting the bullet with multiple things that the United States is doing not to their liking, like their developments in Syria, their withdrawal from the Ain al-Assad base in Iraq. All of these things, Israel did not want them. And the close relationship that Trump has with the Turkish president too. And then we'll have a region of multiple powers with more equal division that will participate and contribute to the emerging multipolar world that we are actually witnessing. And that's why all of these things are happening. And Israel would have to bite the bullet. Chances are Israel doesn't like biting the bullet. They are people who are full of hate. Hate is in their nature, and resentment. They build their whole identity based on hate, resentment, victimhood, entitlement, whether it's from their closest allies or their worst enemies. And they will never take that. And their resentment to Donald Trump might actually lead them to taking the step that many people might not actually see coming, which is directly assassinate Donald Trump.
Hello, friends. Today we have some hot and strange news. Under the soil of Iraq, secret missile cities are rising. Iran is building a huge
And they already knew they had secret missile bases in Iran, but Iran just released data, not in this video, but it is a video of it, of missile bases in Iraq.
network right under America's nose. You won't believe the big plans drawn for this region. The story starts with a new video making much noise. An Iraqi group named Saraya Alia El-Dam revealed its missiles. They only showed a car and a rocket to us, but these simple images reveal a big secret next door. Reports say this is not just one or two warehouses. We are talking about dozens of underground missile cities today. It seems Iraq's underground is drilled like a Swiss cheese. These tunnels are so many they can change war fate. Interesting to know, these plans are not new at all. Everything started during Qasem Soleimani's time in the ISIS war. Back then, they could not work openly due to Americans. But now that space is open. Construction has speeded up. In recent years, workers have been digging day and night. They say Esmail Qaani has also visited Iraq secretly recently. Iranian commanders want to ensure everything goes according to plan. These visits show how serious this issue is for Iran. Now you might ask, where exactly are these secret cities? No one knows the exact place. That is the scary part. Iraq is not mountainous like Iran to hide inside mountains, so they must have dug the ground very deep indeed. Building tunnels in the flat soil of Iraq is hard. This shows military engineers used very advanced technology for this. These tunnels must look like those we saw in Gaza, but the difference is, here they have much more space. In this video, they showed a special missile named Qaher. This missile has a range of 85 kilometers and is precise. Its warhead also carries 45 kilograms of explosives for attacks. Maybe it looks small, but it is dangerous to start. If missiles are short range, they must be near the borders. Probably many of these tunnels are dug near Syria's border. This way, they can target enemy bases in no time. This is a smart strategy to hit fast and run. Do not think they are satisfied with these small missiles. Experts say this year was just an initial preview show. In coming years, they will surely bring heavy long-range missiles. Then Iraq will turn into a big powder keg there. With these actions, Iraq's role in regional military games changes. Iraq is no longer just a war-torn country to us. It is becoming one of the main arms of resistance. Just like Yemen and Lebanon, Iraq has much to say. A very important point is Iraq is Iran's next-door neighbor. This geographical closeness makes moving equipment very simple and easy. It is not like Yemen or Gaza, which are besieged. Long borders mean military aid can always flow down there. Iran intends to turn Iraq into a weapon production factory. No need to bring missiles from Iran. They build there. They take parts and assemble them in safe, secure tunnels. This makes destroying the production line impossible for the enemy. Iran has always looked at Iraq as its own backyard. Historically, Iraqi cities were part of Iran's strategic territory areas. Now, with these cities, Iran's defense depth reaches the Mediterranean. This means pushing war from its borders to enemy homes. Let us not forget the religious bond is very strong. The Shia majority in Iraq makes Iran feel at home. This issue has paved the way for military security cooperation. Iraqi forces protect these projects with their hearts and souls. These tunnels are actually extensions of missile cities inside Iran. It seems a single underground network connects the two countries. This connection makes the war command very coordinated and unified. The enemy won't know if missiles come from Iran or Iraq. The expert in the video says Iraq is preparing for a major war. They want Iraq to be an independent, powerful front later. This means America and Israel must worry about new trouble. Concentrating fire from multiple directions paralyzes any defense system now. The reference to Ctesiphon in the talk was very subtle. It shows Iran's view of Iraq is civilizational and old. They want to revive that historical glory and influence again. Their tools in the 21st century are missiles and tunnels. So far, the Americans and Israelis have shown no harsh reaction. Maybe they have not yet understood the real scale here. Or perhaps they know but cannot do anything right now. But their silence is not consent. They surely have plans. The Gaza war experience showed how decisive tunnels can be. Classic armies really get confused and weak against underground wars. Now imagine applying that same model in a big country. Clearing such a network takes years and costs terrible money. Since Syria's situation got complicated, Iraq's importance increased even more. Iran doesn't want its link to Lebanon to break. For this reason, it turns Iraq into an impenetrable fortress. If Syria is lost, Iraq must fill its empty place. These actions are actually a preemptive defense against ISIS threats. They do not want to be surprised and lose cities. The existence of these bases guarantees Iraq's internal security somewhat. Of course, provided these weapons are used against foreign enemies. Unveiling these missiles has a clear message for regional enemies. The message is, we are everywhere, even where you think not. The hand of resistance is longer and can hit anywhere. This power show completely upsets the political and military equations. In the long run, Iran and Iraq become one army. Political borders remain, but military and security borders are removed. This alliance can be the biggest nightmare for U.S. presence, a power that watches from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. Well, friends, this was the strange story of secret cities. It seems coming days will be pregnant with important events. We will keep following this topic to see what happens. Thanks for staying to the end. Write your comments below.
Even Ocean Defender, which is like a pro-Ukraine, pro-Israel account, said President Trump has reposted a quote on a video he posted earlier, which appears to be old footage of security forces on motorcycles at Haftar Square in the Iranian capital, with the quotes stating the IRGC are shitting their pants. We live in it's a psyop, it's a matrix. Trump is getting handed like the most brain dead, faulty intelligence and immediately posting it on Truth Social. The question on everyone's mind is whether or not we are about to witness another war against the good people of Iran. And we sit here on this stream right now. I've got my feeds refreshing on my laptop, trying to make sure that we stay up to date with the news in case anything hits the fan. As of this very moment, there is not a war that has broken out. President Pezeshkian of Iran is currently taking part in a charity basketball game, if you can believe it. As you're about to see, there are some signs that maybe we won't see a war with Iran, at least not yet. Okay, maybe Trump is going to back off. We know for a fact that on January 14th, Trump did plan strikes against Iran, but felt as though there were not enough U.S. military assets in the region to accomplish the goals. And in fact, there actually were no real fundamental goals or, mission in place to topple the government, which is what they seek to do. So it was postponed. Now we've seen a lot of weapons sent out, and a lot of people believe the war could start this weekend. So let's see what is actually going on. The U.S. has informed its allies that it will attack Iran this coming weekend. The U.S. hopes that an attack on the Iranian government will trigger a new wave of protests. That is from Dropsite News. Now, I will say Dropsite has done some incredible reporting on those files that have been dropped and the connections of the man in the center of those files to Israel, and in particular Mossad and Ehud Barak. But also, DropSite published Ryan Grim over at DropSite. I mean, that guy is just a total Democratic Party shill, total hack. And they did some very suspicious reporting on the Iran protests. They were saying, oh, you know, they're just revolutionaries and trying to fight for freedom or something. They did the whole Mossad propaganda about the Iran riots. So, you know, they reached out to me, DropSite News, and they wanted to get connected with Nicolas Maduro's son because they wanted to do they're doing some investigative piece on Venezuela and the kidnapping. I'm like, I'm not connecting you with anybody. I left those emails on red because what are you guys doing promoting Mossad propaganda about the Iran protests, Ryan Grim? Okay, you did good reporting on the files and the connections to Mossad, but I left those messages on red. I'm not connecting anybody with DropSite News after I saw them doing that Mossad propaganda rituals. Ben Shapiro, Hasbara, Slopfest. So, make of this what you will. DropSite News says that they have sources, and they do have sources in the government, of course, that the U.S. has informed its allies it will attack Iran this coming weekend, which would mean tonight or tomorrow night. But could this be more Mossad propaganda? Could this be more propaganda aimed at trying to pressure Iran, trying to make Iran squirm, trying to make Iran, I don't know, I guess they think that maybe it will force Iran into some sort of insane negotiation position. I don't know, but frankly, I don't have a whole lot of trust in DropSite News, okay? The Wall Street Journal, however, has also made similar reports. They revealed that the Pentagon and the White House have prepared joint plans for a potential military strike against Iran. The scenarios include widespread bombing of government institutions and Revolutionary Guard facilities, or a limited strike on symbolic targets that leave the door open for escalation. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. That kind of is just, the Wall Street Journal is like, well, maybe they'll bomb and maybe it'll be a lot of bombs or maybe it won't be a lot of bombs. Like, okay, thanks for the breakdown, geniuses. That doesn't help any of us. Kind of just threw everything out there. All the possibilities, right? What do I think is going to happen? I do kind of have this idea that maybe they're going to start off with an attempted blockade of the Strait of Hormuz if they pursue the path of least resistance. I think it's going to be one of the two. I think Strait of Hormuz blockade, which would then cascade into war, probably pretty quickly, or widespread bombings. The whole idea of the limited strikes, I think the U.S. understands that that's a stupid idea because Iran on numerous occasions has already said that if you do even limited strikes, then we are going to go all out. It doesn't matter if they're limited or widespread. We're gonna have a fully fleshed out response in return, regardless of what you throw at us. A maritime blockade would be probably the avenue of least resistance that would make the most sense. Another thing that is being discussed, however, is that there will be a raid, a Delta Force-esque raid. Possibly Delta Force would be utilized in Iran. We know for a fact, I reported this right after the Maduro operation, that Delta Force was being deployed to a Middle Eastern country. And we have seen that the plane which carries Delta Force around the world just landed in Azerbaijan. So it does seem as though all options are on the table. All options are possible right now, whether it's an attempted blockade, maritime blockade, heavy strikes, light strikes, raid, whatever they try to do. You know, any of the stupid ideas they have the possibility of attempting to carry out. Now, the U.S. has continued the shipment and supply of armaments and fighter jets to the region over the past 24 hours since our last stream. KC-40XA is taking off with 6 F-35s from Lajes, will be supported by an additional tanker, will take off from Moran in Spain. In addition to that, we have seen, this is a really big one, U.S. Air Force C-5 is en route right now. Strategic heavy lift aircraft is currently heading southeast across Turkey, bound for the Middle East after departing from Ramstein Air Base in Germany earlier on Saturday. The C-5M originated from Robert Gray Army Field in Fort Hood, Texas, home of the U.S. Army's 69th Air Defense Artillery Brigade, which operate the Terminal High-Speed Altitude Area Defense THAAD anti-ballistic missile systems. So they got everything there. They got Patriots, they got THAADs, they got more than enough F-35s, F-16s or what. They got everything there. They have B-52. They have the strategic bombers there now, which they departed through the Pacific and are going to be stationed in the Pacific for potential staging. They have, what am I missing? They've literally got everything. They've got Delta Force there. They have 2 U.S. carrier strike groups there. Yesterday, they sent another destroyer there, which is armed with anti-missile defense systems. And that came in from Greece. So they've got just about everything they could hope for there. I guess they're praying that China doesn't try to take Taiwan at this very moment. In addition to that, U.S. Navy military aircraft Boeing P-8 Poseidon is currently active in the Persian Gulf. Donald Trump, this is how you know we live in a matrix and everything is literally a psyop. Donald Trump is sharing like either months or years old videos of who knows what on Truth Social. Happening now in Tehran, the IRGC are in panic mode, fully shitting their pants. Even OSINT Defender, which is like a pro-Ukraine, pro-Israel account, said President Trump has reposted a quote on a video he posted earlier, which appears to be old footage of security forces on motorcycles at Haftar Square in the Iranian capital, with the quotes stating the IRGC are shitting their pants. We live in it's a psyop, it's a matrix. Trump is getting handed like the most brain dead, faulty intelligence and immediately posting it on Truth Social. We also have the Israeli responses, though. So here is how Israel is reacting to the situation. Israeli military analysts are saying Trump intends to launch wide-scale assault on Iran that will last days or weeks if there's no deal with Tehran. Now, I don't know what discussion could possibly still be had about a deal when the U.S. is saying no uranium enrichment for Iran, no ballistic missiles for Iran. I mean, it's just ludicrous and absurd. It's like when they told Arafat that, oh, yeah, you could have a state, but no standing army, no water rights, no energy rights. It's like, well, what type of a state is that? What type of an Iranian Islamic Republic of Iran is that if Iran is not allowed to have ballistic missiles? You know, just because the U.S. can't produce hypersonic missiles of their own doesn't mean that Iran has to give up their ballistic missiles, right? The U.S. has also just sent $6.5 billion in a new arms deal to Israel. This is, I guess, to be expected at this point, right? The Epstein files are released. The war rage is currently on the up and up surrounding Iran. And now we get the appropriately scheduled $6.5 billion arms sales to Israel. So everything is falling into place right now. All the cards are in their official place. And this, however, is the only thing that I think is throwing myself and many others for a bit of a loop. All right. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will visit Washington, D.C. to meet Trump next month. Now, we don't know if that is tomorrow, because tomorrow is technically next month. We don't know if that's tomorrow. We don't know if that is February 27th. You know, we don't know what this is supposed to mean. We don't know if Netanyahu actually intends on going to the United States to meet with Trump, or if this is a psyop, as was the psyop when the U.S. said, hey, Iran, send your diplomats to Oman. We're going to have a 7th round of negotiations. And then the day before they were going to meet in Oman, Israel began bombing Iran, right? This could be a psyop. I don't know. It is a bit weird. Now, was Netanyahu in the United States or outside of Israel at any point during the 12-day war? According to official sources and reports, the answer is no. If you want to take a closer look at Netanyahu's photos that he was posting at the time and question whether or not they were, in some cases, green screen images, that's another discussion. We do know that Netanyahu was in the United States when Israel carried out their massive strike on the leader of Hezbollah in Lebanon, Syed Hassan Nasrallah. So that was a major operation that the Israelis did carry out while Netanyahu was in the United States. It's not to say that this could not start while Netanyahu's in the United States, but it does raise the question, because I think it would be unusual for something of this magnitude to take place while Netanyahu is visiting the United States. But again, this could all be a psyop, and it could be that, they're saying this to make the Iranians think that, they're going to delay it. Netanyahu has to have another meeting with Trump, I guess, to discuss the matter and plan it further. But then maybe he actually won't go and they'll begin the bombings, right? So there's no clarity on that, but that is a report that has been verified. Syed Mohammad Marandi, a Iranian professor that we've spoken to many times, friend of the show, as they say, and also a former key negotiator, an interlocutor for the Iranian government and negotiator with the United States. He said Trump may be backing down against Iran just as he did with Yemen. Nevertheless, Iran remembers Trump's deceit before the 12-day war. That is true. That is true. That is all happening at the same time. It is true. In addition to that, Syed Mohammad Marandi says the Iranian armed forces are fully prepared for an all-out war. So regardless, whether Iran thinks that they're going to launch the war today, tomorrow, and a month from now, they are prepared as they can be, right? That is kind of the vibe I am getting from most Iranians. They don't really know what to make of what's going on, but they are preparing as if war is about to begin, right? We have seen multiple reports that Iranian air defenses have been activated in Tehran. That's not surprising. Widespread GPS disruption is reported in the Middle East right now, as well as inside of Tehran. There's heavy jamming inside of Tehran, in and around Tehran. Iran has announced that they have prepared more extensively than they did during the 12-day war. Iran has designated 82 metro stations and 300 parking lots in Tehran as bomb shelters and is equipping them with essential supplies. Tehran municipality announces that underground metro stations and parking garages are being equipped with essential supplies and prepared to become emergency shelters in case of an upcoming war. Yesterday, we saw that Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, visits mausoleum of the late founder of the Islamic Republic, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khamenei, on the eve of the revolution's 47th anniversary. So, is this a sign? This is clearly a sign that, in my eyes, the Islamic Republic of Iran is very strong, very united, and not fearful of anything. That's what I say it's a sign of. Some people online will try to interpret this and be like, this means that a big decision is about to be made, and Khamenei is visiting these sites, and it's like this is indication that they're praying for a big decision, an answer to a big decision. I don't know. All I know is that the Israelis have been telling us that the supreme leader has been in a bunker for the past, 4 months, as he is trembling in fear about a potential U.S. or Israeli or U.S.-Israeli NATO, including the European strike on Iran. And meanwhile, the supreme leader is just like, he's chilling. He's out and about. He's doing public appearances. He's at the shrine or the mausoleum of the founder of the Islamic Republic. And the president, as I said, currently is doing a basketball charity game in Iran. So they're not in any bunkers. They're just hanging out. They're chilling. They're doing the official duties as per usual. Also, it was just reported. I told you I'm giving you the up-to-date information. It was just reported 3 minutes ago, Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian held a phone call with the president of Egypt. Obviously, this is a clear puppet vassal of the United States and Israel, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. So there were two efforts made by the U.S. to reach out to the Iranians today. That was one of them. The other one was that the Qatari foreign minister came to Tehran with an official message from the United States. So that is now 2 official contacts effectively with U.S. messengers, okay? The commander of the Iranian army, Major General Amir Hatami, said, "Our hands are on the trigger, and we will defend the country, and the Islamic Republic is not destructible." So he gave a press conference today, a speech where he stated this, in addition to other points. He said, "We must make the enemy realize that if they attack, they will suffer serious harm, and this requires unity, cohesion, and cooperation from us. We know that our country faces major problems, and like other peoples, we must address the issues and living problems. The enemies issued kill orders, but they shamelessly seek to accuse the Islamic Republic. This is a big lie." We also had Ali Shamkhani, the senior advisor to Khamenei. He came out and said, "We understand the enemy's operational plan and have full knowledge of it. At the right time, we will strike targets to prevent it from being carried out. Targeting the heart of Israel," he said, "the heart of Israel, Tel Aviv, will be part of our response, and we do not limit the conflict to the sea alone. We are prepared for broader and more complex scenarios." And lastly, this is pretty interesting. Iranian state TV, they did this infographic showing all of the U.S. military bases and U.S. assets in the region and how they are all within striking distance of Iran's, the 2,000 kilometer range missiles that they publicly admit to having. And, it's basically, Press TV posted this saying, "A video every American family should see before sending their youth to fight a dangerous war in West Asia for Israel." So that's Iranian state TV saying what no American media will say, which is the truth. Before you leave, I want to say thank you for the support, because after 2 years of being banned,
...2026, and reports are now saying that the U.S. and Iran are talking and that we could see the possibility of in-person negotiations. This comes, of course, as Iran has warned that any sort of symbolic attack from the U.S. will be met with an all-out regional war. It has also come as the U.S. military is building up its assets in the region with its eye still on Iran. But if there's one thing we can all agree on, it's that the U.S. is not prepared for a regional war. Its allies, including those in Israel, are definitely not prepared. So it raises a lot of questions about what the Trump administration is going to try to do, even as we know that its long-term goal will always be destabilization in Iran, because Iran is a key pillar of the multipolar world that the US cannot control. We got into all of the latest and more with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Syed Mohammad Marandi, a professor at the University of Tehran. Professor Marandi, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
It's great to have you back on the show. Now, I want to get your take on the latest as we went from the U.S. preparing for an attack and Iran warning of a regional war to now reports that we could see U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff meet Iran's foreign minister in person for talks as early as this Friday. So what do you think triggered this sudden change? And do you think that the U.S. can be trusted this time around?
Well, it's not exactly clear what will happen, if there will be talks between the two and whether they'll be direct or not. But we do have a tweet from the chair of the Supreme National Security Council here in Iran, Dr. Larijani, who said something like that the framework for negotiations is being discussed and progress has been made. In other words, they are negotiating about negotiating. And it's possible that Trump wants an off-ramp and that the Iranians are preparing the ground so that that could be possible for him to back off. But then again, This is the same Trump that, as he was negotiating with Iran before, he was conspiring with Netanyahu to attack Iran. And this is the same Trump that negotiated the ceasefire in Gaza, and every day they're slaughtering women and children there as we speak. So I don't think anyone in Iran has any illusions about the nature of the Trump administration, the Trump regime, but they will, if they find an opportunity to decrease tensions, they'll pursue it. But at the same time, the armed forces are on maximum alert. And the Iranians have said that even a symbolic attack will be met with, will be seen as the beginning of a full-scale war. And Iran's counterstrike will be massive and it won't pull any punches. And the reason is that the Iranians are saying that even a symbolic strike would be an act of war. But more importantly, what Trump wants to do is to be able to hit Iran hit back, and then come back 6 months later, perhaps create another armed terrorist attack inside Iran, and then again pretend it's civilians like they did last time around, and then create an environment for him to strike again. And so the Iranians are saying enough is enough. We are going to hit back very hard. So either the United States attacks and it gets hit back and we have war, or the United States backs off. And so the Iranians have prepared their missile defense, their surface to ship missiles. Their allies in Iraq, in Yemen, in Lebanon, and elsewhere are being prepared. We saw footage of an underground missile base in Iraq shown online. Obviously, that's sending a message that Iraq too, the resistance there has capabilities that can be directed at the United States or the Israeli regime. I think, and after what the Ayatollah Khamenei yesterday said, that an attack on Iran would lead to a regional war, probably makes decision makers in Washington think twice. Although many are Israeli firsters and they would be willing to sacrifice U.S. interests for the sake of Israel. So we cannot say which way it'll go.
Yeah, and that's the difficult thing as you watch this play out, because on one hand, you look at the US and you think, surely they realize just what a stupid mistake it would be to attack Iran, to pursue a regional war, how devastating it would be for the US and for their Zionist friends in the region. But on top of that, when it comes to the warnings that we heard from Iran's Ayatollah Khamenei, we not only heard him talk about a regional war, but he also noted that the US and that the Zionists are responsible for fueling conflict in the region and for fueling the recent terror attacks that we saw in Iran. And he did not hold anything back here, right? He noted that the horrific violence was similar to what we saw from ISIS militants, saying on X, quote, "A defining feature of this sedition was its violence. It was like that of the Daesh. Who created Daesh? The current US president explicitly stated, we created ISIS." So given that Iran knows that the US is a country that is always going to push for destabilization, how do you see the chances for negotiations and for a possible deal here?
I'm not very optimistic. The Iranians have said that they're not going to give up their regional allies, they're not going to give up their defense capabilities, and they're not going to give up peaceful nuclear enrichment, and they're not going to send their enriched uranium abroad. So it's difficult to see how this can be pushed forward, especially since the real problem, what prevents Iran and the United States from having reasonable relations, is the Israeli regime. If it wasn't for this regime, if it wasn't for Zionism, the relationship between the two countries would be normal today, just like Iran's relationship with all other countries. So it's difficult to say where this will go. But I think that there are those in the United States that recognize that today Iran's military capabilities and the capabilities of its allies make a an attack on Iran a very foolish thing to do. And the United States is not the United States of 20, 30 years ago when it was the global hyperpower, as someone once called it. So again, you would think that there would be no violence, there would be no attack. But then again, this is Trump, and the people surrounding Trump are known entities, and therefore it's really difficult to say where it'll go. The Iranians are continuing to prepare themselves for the worst. But if they feel that they can give Trump a way out or provide him a way out where without giving any concessions, tensions can be eased, I presume that they will do that. Remember, when Trump waged war against the Yemeni people, against Ansarullah, what they call in the West the Houthis, Trump said he's going to destroy them, and his Secretary of War, as they now call him, he said they're going to destroy Yemen. And after a month, Trump said, and so the Houthis, as they say in the West, again, not a proper term, but he said they capitulated. But it turned out that it was the opposite, that they had given no concessions and Trump simply had to walk away and concede defeat. So if in the case of Iran, Trump wants to say, I won, but gets nothing, that is fine for the Iranians, I suppose. But if Trump has any expectations that Iran will concede its right to enrichment or its right for a ballistic missile defense capability or its right to have allies in the region and beyond, that's just not going to happen. There's no chance of that.
Yeah, and as we watch those talks play out, just like we did last time, right? The US goes into it, they seem like they may be a little bit reasonable, and then they turn around and they go, oh, well, Iran can't have any enriched uranium. And Iran's going, well, it's our right to do so under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And the Trump administration is acting as though they can just make the rules. And so, yeah, if the US is expecting that they are going to get some kind of a deal where basically the US gets everything that they want, that's not going to work. But when it comes to the Trump administration and this kind of hunger for regime change, it really seems like Trump wants it under this term, right? He didn't get it the last time around, so now he is seeking it this time around. Do you think that the Trump administration in particular, that they truly understand what's at stake here in this push? And while on one hand they act as though they care about a nuclear deal or as though they care about protests, really violent riots and terrorism in Iran, that this quest for regime change would spark a full-on regional war that would be devastating for the US at the end of the day?
It's hard to say if they really comprehend it. I would assume that there are sane people in the Pentagon and elsewhere who understand what all this means. You have Iraq with a population of 45 million people, let's say. The new parliament that's been elected, Iran's allies won the elections. And the resistance in Iraq says they'll fight. And Iraq is a huge country. Yemen is building up its arsenal and its capabilities ever since the ceasefire. So they'll be much more capable than before. So imagine two powerhouses in Iraq and Yemen and Iran, and then you have Hezbollah. I don't think there's a chance in the world that the Americans can come out with success. And Iran's ballistic missile program, I think everyone has been impressed by it. The Israelis had to back down and seek a ceasefire. And Iran's capabilities that are directed towards the United States are much greater than those capabilities directed towards the Israeli regime, because for 25 years, the Iranians have been planning for a potential US attack. Ever since Iraq and Afghanistan were occupied, and Bush and then Obama kept saying all options are on the table, the Iranians have been developing underground defense capabilities, short-range missiles, medium-range missiles, drones, and they can destroy everything in the Persian Gulf region and bring an end to the oil and gas trade across West Asia and the Caucasus. So that would create a global economic meltdown. I think so when you combine Iraq, Yemen, Iran, and all this, there's no way for success. But then again, there are those who are the Israeli firsters. And for them, the priority is Israel. It's not the United States. It's not the people of the United States. It's not the global economy. It's not Western economy. So they may push him and he may foolishly move in that direction. So Iran is not going to trust the United States, especially because of the point that you raised. When we negotiated last time, not only did it turn out that it was deception all along, but on day one, the US said one thing, and then they kept moving the goalposts. But it's not just Iran, it's the nuclear deal that it's not just Iran, and now it's also Iran years ago when Trump himself tore up an agreement between Iran and the United States. And it's not just Iran itself, it's Gaza, the ceasefire in Gaza. Trump was behind it. Every day the Israelis continue to slaughter Palestinian women and children, and the genocide is ongoing. In Lebanon, every day the Israelis are bombing, despite the ceasefire that the Western countries are guarantors. So when Iran sees all these things in Lebanon, in Gaza, the previous tearing up of the nuclear deal, Witkoff's behavior, the deception and strikes and war against Iran, it makes it very difficult for a deal. And so I don't think that there's a chance in the world that the Iranians are going to trust Trump. But we'll have to see how it plays out. There is still a possibility that we will have war. I think both things can happen. We can move towards de-escalation and we can move towards war. But I think that ultimately the world is changing, and the current situation is not sustainable for the United States. And the smart thing to do would be to de-escalate and to focus on rebuilding the United States instead of destroying the rest of the world.
Yeah, I wish they would focus on that, right? I wish that the US politicians who are supposed to serve the American public actually were focused on doing so. And unfortunately, we do have a very heavy Zionist influence here in the US. And I thought it was interesting. I saw reports going both ways, both saying that Israel wanted the US to follow through with an attack on Iran, and also saying that Israel wanted the US to pull back, noting that they were nowhere near ready. I know we have reports that, US air defenses are not ready all around the region, but it was also reported that Israel sent a military delegation to the Pentagon for secret talks. So I'm curious, how do you see the Zionists and kind of the role that they're playing in all of this? Because obviously they want war with Iran, but they also don't want to be blown off the map, and they can't exactly have their cake and eat it too.
Well, that's the problem. And as they try to develop their air defenses, the Iranians are developing their missile capabilities too. And Iran has learned a lot from the 12-day war that the Israeli regime and Trump carried out against it. And so they're much more prepared today than they were back then. So it's hard to say, really. Ultimately, I think that any war now would be a loss to Israel, because if the United States fights, it will not win. It's not a winnable war. And a weakened United States, and the world will blame the United States for the war and the global consequences, because the global consequences of a US attack on Iran are much greater than what we're seeing in Ukraine. Because if and when oil and gas prices go through the roof and the economies of the region are completely disrupted, and I think that some of the regimes in the Persian Gulf will collapse very swiftly, then it's going to affect life across Latin America, across Asia, across Africa, across North America. It'll change, and people will blame Trump for that. And the weakened United States means a weakened Israeli regime, because the Israeli regime is completely dependent on the West and the United States in particular.
Yeah, and they look at the possibility of a war, and you know that it is not going to end well for them. And the last thing that I wanted to bring up, when kind of taking a look at the rest of the region and looking at some of the US allies there, Saudi Arabia has been an interesting one over the last week, because publicly they have said, right, that they do not want their airspace to be used by the US for a possible attack. But then you also had Axios coming out with a report saying that privately Saudi Arabia was telling the US, well, if you don't attack now, then Iran is going to come out stronger. How do you view the position that these Gulf monarchies are in? Because they would, of course, be up for attack if there was a regional war. But then at the same time, they're also in the same boat of the US of wanting a weaker Iran in the long term.
Well, Iran does know that air bases and military bases in the Persian Gulf region, as we speak, are being used by the Americans to prepare themselves against Iran. And that makes all those family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf region complicit. And of course, the same can be said about the government in Baku, the Aliyev government, because he is a close ally of the Israeli regime. And so if the United States strikes Iran, then Iran will strike back at these regimes. There will be no more oil exports or gas exports, and they will only have themselves to blame because they hosted US bases and assisted the United States. And they are in no position to fight Iran. I mean, Saudi Arabia, with the help of the entire West and regional regimes, and even Qatar and Turkey, before they broke up with the Saudis and then we had the siege in Qatar, they were all helping in the war against Yemen, and the Saudis failed. Ultimately, they had to accept a ceasefire with Yemen after 7 years of genocidal war. This is not a competent government. And then Qatar or the Emirates, these are tiny populations where the foreigners who are mostly indentured servants and effectively slaves who live in these countries, if they wobble, they'll take. It's unclear who will be in charge. So they are really in no position to defend themselves. So the smart thing for them to do would be to end this and to stop cooperating with the United States. But they're proxies. They don't have sovereignty. They never did have sovereignty. And their fate is in their own hands. If they continue to go down this road and if there's conflict, there's no doubt that they will not survive because they're all completely dependent on oil and gas. And they've squandered most of their wealth. A lot of their wealth is in U.S. treasuries. They're never going to get that money back. So, it's unclear. Everything will depend on what Trump does. So they should be hoping that Trump doesn't go towards conflict because they will be the biggest losers of all.
Yeah, the price you pay for being a US proxy, it always comes back home eventually. We saw it in Ukraine. We've seen it on and on with all of these little US proxies and puppets. And now we're seeing today's version as you have the Trump administration still toying with the possibility of war against Iran. And I really hope that a lot of people continue to listen to your warnings because this would be unlike anything we've ever seen, and it would not be good for really anyone at the end of the day. I always appreciate you taking the time to join me to break down all of the latest here. Syed Mohammed Marandi, a professor at the University of
destroying the Western alliance? This is a question that many people around the world are asking, but in order to try to provide an answer, we have to go back and look at where the Western alliance even came from in the first place. Because we can't forget that for hundreds of years, the European powers were constantly fighting each other in endless wars. And this culminated in the horrors of World War I and World War II, when the European empires and the Japanese empire all destroyed each other. And coming out of World War II, the United States was the only great power that was not devastated by the war, and the US used this as an opportunity to create a global empire. At the Bretton Woods Conference, which was held in the US in 1944, a new global financial system was created with the US dollar at the center of that new financial system. And then in 1949, the US helped to create NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which was a way of militarily unifying Europe after Europe had destroyed itself for hundreds of years in these constant internal battles. And it's very important to understand that the United States has always been the leader of NATO, and Europe has been subordinated to the US. This was admitted essentially by the first founding Secretary General of NATO, the British General Lord Ismay, who famously said that NATO was created, quote, to keep the Soviet Union out, the Americans in, and the Germans down, end quote. So in other words, NATO was a way for the US empire coming out of World War II to subordinate Europe, to prevent Europe from having an independent foreign policy in order to serve the foreign policy interests of US corporations, and especially Wall Street and the military-industrial complex. And by waging the first Cold War against the Soviet Union, this was a way for the United States to maintain this Western alliance with Washington on top, because there was the perception that the Soviet Union was the shared enemy of not only the US, but also of Europe. However, in 1991, the USSR was overthrown, and the United States became the only superpower on Earth. This was known as the unipolar era. But then something happened that completely changed everything, and that was the economic rise of China. Throughout this time, China was economically developing, and in fact, in 2016, China overtook the United States as the largest economy on Earth when you measure its GDP at purchasing power parity. China now makes up close to 20% of the global economy, compared to less than 15% represented by the United States. And over time, China's share of the global economy is increasing, whereas that of the US is falling. Moreover, it's not just economic size, but also manufacturing capacity. China became the factory of the world. Today, China produces around 1/3 of all global manufacturing output. China manufactures more than the next 9 largest manufacturing economies in the world combined. And at first, China was only producing low value added goods like textiles and toasters and toys. But now China has rapidly moved up the global value chain through state planning and public investment and industrial policy. And now China leads scientific research in 90% of advanced technologies, cutting edge technologies in the world today. So China has become the leading economic power, the leading manufacturing power, and the leading scientific and technological power. In other words, China is the only country powerful enough to challenge the global dominance of the US empire in multiple domains, which is why Washington previously was trying to change its strategy. In particular, the Joe Biden administration was trying to remake the Western alliance in order to focus on containing China. And the Biden administration used ridiculous rhetoric of so-called democracy versus authoritarianism to try to further increase the unity within the Western imperialist bloc in order to wage a new Cold War against China, Cold War II.
In the battle between democracy and autocracies, democracies are rising to the moment. And the world is clearly choosing the side of peace and security.
Just as the US had used the supposed threat posed by the Soviet Union in order to unify the Western alliance in the first Cold War, the US was trying to use China to unify the Western alliance in the second Cold War. But there have always been some very significant problems with this strategy. First of all, China is one of the top trading partners of Europe, of both the European Union and the United Kingdom, which means it's difficult for the US to force Europe to completely cut off ties with China, given how economically they are already deeply integrated. So this is where Donald Trump comes in. His strategy has been a bit different. The Trump administration is also obsessed with trying to contain and weaken China, but Trump views Europe with contempt. He sees Europe as a liability, not an asset for the US empire. So Trump has been using threats and blackmail to force Europe to pay tribute to the US empire to try to strengthen the US to prepare for a future conflict with China. And this is why Trump forced an unequal treaty on the European Union, in which Europe is not allowed to put tariffs on US goods, but the United States puts tariffs on European exports. And even more importantly, according to the Trump White House, in this trade deal that the US forced upon the EU, Europe is going to purchase $750 billion in US energy and invest $600 billion in the US from 2025 until 2028. We're talking about more than $1.3 trillion being spent in the US economy. So the US in the short term under Trump is trying to suck massive resources out of Europe in order to strengthen the US to prepare for a future conflict with China. And this is also why Trump wants to physically expand the territory of the US empire. This is why Trump has vowed to colonize Canada and turn it into the 51st state, as he says. He also claims that he's going to colonize Venezuela. And another very important factor here is Greenland. Trump has repeatedly said that the US is going to colonize Greenland and take over Greenland, which is a territory of Denmark. And Denmark is a NATO member, a European ally of the US. And Trump admits that this is because the US wants to further militarize Greenland in order to weaken China and Russia, especially as climate change melts ice in the Arctic and open new trade routes and also potential routes for military vessels. So Trump wants to militarize Greenland, where there already is a US military base, but he wants to make more. But this is also because Greenland has hundreds of billions or perhaps even trillions of dollars worth of critical minerals that the US wants to get access to. And by the way, many billionaire oligarchs in the US who donated to Trump's campaign and are close allies of Trump have invested very heavily in exploiting those critical minerals in Greenland. But more profoundly, this is also related to China, because China dominates the global supply chain for most critical minerals, and especially for rare earth elements. And the US government is obsessed with trying to create a new supply chain for critical minerals that cuts out China. And this is bipartisan. It's not just Trump, but also Biden and the Democrats that have tried to do this. And this is partially, from their perspective, an issue of so-called national security, because the US military industrial complex needs lots of critical minerals and rare earths in order to make weapons and military equipment. And yet China dominates the supply chain for those critical minerals and rare earths. So if the US wants to prepare for a future conflict with China, it has to create a new supply chain in order to cut China out of the supply chain as it makes more weapons and military equipment to prepare for a conflict with China. So again, this is a significant reason why Trump wants to colonize Greenland, and also because processing rare earths is very environmentally destructive. So the Trump administration would prefer to poison the people of Greenland and pollute their territory rather than pollute domestic US territory. But again, this has significant geopolitical implications because Greenland is an autonomous territory of Denmark, a NATO member and US ally. So Trump is threatening to colonize the territory of a major US ally. And this is why some US politicians have said that if Trump annexes Greenland, it would be the end of NATO. But is that true? Could this actually be the end of NATO? Could this actually be the end of the Western Alliance? Well, if you want me to be honest, I'm still quite skeptical about that. But today I'm going to be looking at some of the significant developments that have been happening recently. Now, I mentioned earlier that the Biden administration's strategy was to try to strengthen the Western Alliance in order to contain and weaken China. But ironically, the extremely aggressive policies carried out by the Trump administration have actually reminded Europe that there are other alternatives in the world. The US is not the only game in town. And in fact, European leaders have been taking many trips to Beijing, meeting with their Chinese counterparts and talking about ways to deepen cooperation. So the UK's Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, visited China in January, and he announced a new series of trade and investment deals with China. By the way, Starmer also announced that UK citizens will be able to travel to China visa-free. This is a very significant development that's been happening over the past few years. And now citizens of most countries in Europe can go to China without a visa, which obviously has led to a significant increase in tourism and person-to-person exchange. And it's not just the UK that has been improving its relations with China, but also the European Union. And top leaders of EU member states have taken some high-profile trips to China recently, including France's President Emmanuel Macron. But the US is not just sitting on its hands and allowing all this to happen without pushing back. Donald Trump has been openly threatening European leaders. And when the UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer visited China, Trump said it was very dangerous, and he warned European countries not to improve their relations with China. Of course, the US wants these European countries to remain vassals of Washington. So a lot of people have been pondering the question, will this lead to a split in the Western alliance? And will Europe lean more toward China rather than toward the US, which, US-European relations have been extremely close. Transatlantic relations have been extremely close since the end of World War II. What we're seeing now are growing divisions within Europe. On one side, you have countries like Spain, which are pushing for closer ties with China and are more critical of the Atlanticist movement and the transatlantic alliance. Now, Spain and some of the smaller economies in Southern Europe, on the periphery of Europe, are not major manufacturing powers. So they're seeing this as an opportunity to attract Chinese investment. In particular, Spain does not have a significant car industry, so it's attracting Chinese EV investment to make electric vehicles inside Spain in order to be exported to other countries in the European Union. However, on the other side of this split in Europe, you have major manufacturing countries like Germany. Germany has been a top industrial power for decades, and the heart of Germany's manufacturing is its car industry. And German car companies are extremely afraid of competition with China. Honestly, they cannot compete with Chinese car companies, which make better products at a lower price point. And this is why German exports to China have been falling significantly in recent years. Now, if you go back a few decades, Germany loved to trade with China because German car companies had access to the world's biggest market. China has 1.4 billion people, and they were buying a lot of German cars. But today they can buy Chinese cars and other products that, again, are superior and lower cost. So Germany now has become an obstacle within the European Union to improved relations with China because German capitalists are afraid of competing with Chinese companies. And let's not forget, by the way, that the current leader of Germany, Chancellor Friedrich Merz, was previously the head of the German arm of BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, the Wall Street giant. And Merz has been a lifelong, fervent, die-hard Atlanticist. He deeply believes in this transatlantic alliance between Europe and the United States, and especially Wall Street. So as some countries in the EU, like Spain, are looking closer to China, other countries like Germany are just begging, they are hoping that Trump represents a short-term phenomenon, and in a few years, a Democrat like Joe Biden will come back to power in the White House, and the US will improve its relations with Europe. They will repair all of the damage done, and they will revive transatlantic relations. As the European Union said when Trump's first term ended and Biden came in 2021, they're hoping that Trump's second term is all a nightmare and everything can be undone. And honestly, if a Democrat like, let's say, Gavin Newsom or Pete Buttigieg wins the 2028 presidential election in the US, then that certainly is a possibility that they will try to reset relations with Europe. But with that said, I should stress that there are some changes that are happening that will continue in the medium to the long term. So not everything can just be magically reversed. For instance, It's not just Europe improving its relations with China, but the EU has also been seeking to make trade deals with other major powers, including, for instance, India. So in January, the EU and India came to a major trade agreement after 20 years of negotiations. And so many people thought this deal would never go through. It was constantly failing for decades. And yet now, ironically, Trump's attacks on Europe have finally forced it to diversify its trade partnerships. We saw another example in January when the EU signed a historic trade agreement with Mercosur. This is a trade bloc of South American nations, including Brazil and Argentina, which are two of the largest economies in Latin America. And this breakthrough came after 25 years of negotiation. So once again, Trump's attacks on Europe finally forced the EU to seek more trading partners to diversify their economic relations. But I should emphasize this is going to be a slow and complicated process. It's certainly not going to happen overnight because Europe is still pretty dependent economically on the United States. So 19% of the EU's exports go to the US market, and 13.5% of the EU's imports come from the United States. The UK and Switzerland are also top trading partners, but their markets are very small. Turkey is a bigger market and another major trading partner, but China, of course, is just at a whole new level with 1.4 billion people. So it makes sense that the EU wants to deepen its trade with China and India. Together, China and India have 2.8 billion people. That's a massive, massive market. The UK is in a very similar situation. 14% of the UK's exports go to the US, and 12% of the imports into the UK come from the US. And the UK also trades a lot with EU member states and, of course, with China. So once again, it makes sense that the UK wants to deepen its trade with China. I should say that when we're talking about the Western Alliance, it's not just Europe, it's also Canada and Australia. And I should say that I think it's more plausible for Europe to diversify its trade relations and weaken its dependence on the US compared to a country like Canada, which is so extremely dependent on the US. Nearly 80% of Canada's exports go to the US market, over 3/4. That is absolutely crazy. And it shows that the US has extreme leverage over Canada. Moreover, 50% of Canada's imports come from the US. China is the number 2 trading partner of Canada, but the gap in between Canada's trade with the US and its trade with China is extreme. And that makes it much more difficult for Canada to reduce its dependency on the US. Canada's current Prime Minister, Mark Carney, is trying. He also took a trip to China in January, and he reduced Canadian tariffs on China. But for Canada, this is going to be a very long and difficult process. But thus far, I've been focusing primarily on economic dependency, trade dependency, but that's only one form. There are many other kinds of dependency. And for Europe, one of the worst is military and security dependency. Europe is entirely dependent on the US, not only for military equipment, which is created by US corporations in the military-industrial complex. Europe has been talking a lot about remilitarizing, and NATO member states in Europe want to spend more on their own local militaries, but a lot of that money is going to US corporations in the military-industrial complex. And then Europe remains militarily occupied by the United States. The US has tens of thousands of troops all across Europe, including more than 30,000 troops in Germany. And the US has a constellation of hundreds of military bases across Europe, including 119 bases in Germany, 44 bases in Italy, 25 bases in the UK, which is no longer in the EU, but it's still part of the broader Europe. And even Turkey, which is also a member of NATO, it's not in the European Union. There are 13 US military bases in Turkey as well. So European countries say they want to rebuild their militaries, and they have vowed to significantly increase spending on the military, but that is much easier said than done. And if it's going to happen, it's going to take a long time. We're not talking about 2 or 3 years. We're talking about decades. And yet there are other dependencies that Europe also has to think about. Another major dependency is energy. And this is quite ironic because for many years, pro-NATO Atlanticist politicians in Europe constantly complained about the EU's dependency on Russian energy, on Russian oil and gas. And they insisted that Europe should boycott Russian oil and gas. So what happened? Now Europe replaced that dependency with a new dependency on US energy, on US oil, and US liquefied natural gas. I created these charts using data from the EU's official statistics office, Eurostat, and it visually illustrates how Europe previously had gotten the vast majority of its oil from Russia, and due to the war in Ukraine, the EU stopped buying Russian oil. And then what country replaced Russia as the top exporter of petroleum products to the EU? None other than the United States. And when you look at the EU's imports of liquefied natural gas, LNG, I mean, it's just completely absurd, the level of dependency that the EU now has on the US. The amount of LNG that the EU imports from the US is significantly larger than from any other country by a massive margin. So now that Trump is attacking Europe, Brussels is terrified that Washington could weaponize the EU's energy dependency on the US. Trump could decide one day that he's going to cut off LNG exports to Europe, which could cause a significant economic crisis. So the EU is trying to once again diversify its energy providers to reduce its reliance on US LNG by importing more LNG from Canada. That's not surprising. And also Qatar, which is hilarious because the EU constantly claims that its foreign policy supports so-called democracy and human rights. And that's why the EU hates Russia and all these other countries. Meanwhile, the EU has been depending more and more on monarchies in the Persian Gulf. Qatar is a monarchy. It does not even pretend to be a democracy. But the EU is totally happy to deepen their ties with these monarchies in the Gulf because, of course, it needs their energy. So, European foreign policy has never been motivated in any way by democracy and human rights. That's completely childish. No one actually believes that. But anyway, getting back to the issue of dependency, another major dependency that Europe has on the US is in technology. And now EU officials have been sounding the alarm over their extreme dependence on US big tech corporations. For years, the EU has said that it's working on trying to promote more European companies, domestic technology firms, in order to reduce their dependency on Silicon Valley in the US. But thus far, they have completely failed. Look, for instance, at the market share of cloud providers. Cloud services are extremely important for the digital economy today. Basically, none of the websites and apps that we use in everyday life constantly, none of them would work without cloud providers. And yet European cloud providers make up less than 15% of the European market. And that figure has been decreasing over the past decade. It used to be over 25%. Now it's less than 15%. And if you look at the global market for cloud infrastructure, there are only two countries that are real players, the US and China. So if you look at the top cloud providers, they are AWS, it's Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud. Together, those three US big tech companies have more than 60% of the global market share for cloud infrastructure. You do have a few Chinese companies like Alibaba Cloud and Tencent Cloud, but their market share is pretty small. It's primarily in China, and the other companies are also US firms. And if you look at the European cloud market in particular, these US big tech oligopolies in Silicon Valley utterly dominate. Amazon, Microsoft, Google, IBM, Salesforce, those are the top five across Europe. In Germany, you do have Deutsche Telekom. In France, you do have OVH and Orange. But otherwise, almost all of the cloud service providers in Europe are US companies. And when it comes to artificial intelligence, I mean, Europe is completely losing out. There are only really two major competitors in the global AI race, the US and China. Europe is barely even on the map, as in the US and China, there is this enormous, historic build out, capital expenditure of data centers and infrastructure for AI, for this new industrial revolution. And Europe is once again being left behind and becoming dependent on US big tech firms in Silicon Valley. And now the Trump administration is threatening to potentially weaponize this European dependency on US big tech companies. And if you've been to Europe, you know that it's not just cloud services, it's not just AI. I mean, all of the social media platforms, they're all from US companies. Most people in Europe use Google and the various Google products like Gmail for their mail and Google Drive and Google Docs. YouTube is the most popular website, and YouTube is owned by Google. There are very few European alternatives, and the US has already made it clear that it's willing to weaponize that dependency. Now, with all of that said, I should point out that Europe does have a small handful of cards that it can play. So, for instance, ASML is a major Dutch company. It makes the world's best photolithography machines, which are needed to make advanced chips. So ASML is one of the most important companies on Earth, and this is a Dutch company. It's in the EU member, the Netherlands. So some people in the EU have said that this is a bargaining chip that the EU can use as Trump threatens to colonize Greenland. European officials could try to use ASML to cut off the US from access to this very important photolithography equipment. However, that strategy probably wouldn't work because ASML is also dependent on inputs and parts from the US, from US companies. The supply chain is very deep, it's very long. There are so many levels of integration, it would be very difficult to try to break those off. And we're seeing the same discussion happening now in the financial sector, because Europe's financial sector is also deeply integrated with the US financial sector. But some people in Europe are arguing that another card that Europe has in this dispute with the US is its $10 trillion of holdings of US assets. Because it's true that the dollar is the global reserve currency and Wall Street is the heart of the global financial system. But actually, investors in Europe, including institutions and also retail investors, they hold many US assets, which actually could be leverage they could potentially hold over the US. So EU institutions hold $6 trillion in US equities, that is stocks in publicly listed US companies. They also hold $2 trillion of US federal government debt, treasury securities. In fact, European countries hold close to 40% of the US treasuries that are held by foreign investors. Now, the number one holder on earth is Japan, but after Japan, the second biggest holder is the UK. And you also have massive holdings in Belgium, Luxembourg, France, Ireland, Switzerland, Norway, and other European countries. So as Trump threatens to colonize Greenland, the autonomous territory of NATO member Denmark, some people in Europe have suggested that these European financial institutions could dump their holdings of US treasuries to cause a crisis in the US bond market. And that actually is a very real possibility. This would be very painful for the US bond market because as European investors sell their holdings of US treasuries, it would significantly increase the supply, which would lead to a major rise in the yield on US treasuries. And we've already seen, for instance, that the yield on the 10-year US treasury note has been persistently high at more than 4% over the past few years, despite many attempts by the US government to bring down those yields, despite the fact that the Federal Reserve, the US central bank, the Fed, has cut interest rates multiple times, and yet that has only brought down yields on the short end of the curve. The long end of the curve remains stubbornly high. So, like I said, this actually is a real card that Europe could play that would actually force the US government to take a step back. It's not only the US that has all of the leverage over Europe. Europe does have some leverage. However, with that said, I'm still very skeptical about all of this. I think a lot of this is just rhetoric. It's Europeans puffing up their chest and saying that they'll fight back and defend themselves against the US. But we've seen again and again and again in recent years that pretty much every time the US attacks Europe, Europe does not actually retaliate, which is why Trump feels so empowered to just continue walking all over Europe and treating European countries like vassals. And in fact, in response to this discussion of Europe potentially dumping US assets, Trump threatened, quote, big retaliation, end quote, against Europe. So Trump has made it clear that if Europe does actually try to retaliate in this way against Trump's threats, that Trump will only move further up the escalation ladder. And this is why, at the end of the day, I'm very skeptical about this narrative that Trump has completely destroyed the Western alliance and this is the end of NATO. Because again, we've seen how Europe has always bent over backward, despite the fact that Trump has constantly threatened them for almost a decade now. European political leaders love to issue strongly worded messages and send out open letters and wag their finger. But when the US attacks them, almost always European leaders give in, they buckle. A perfect example of this was the embarrassing episode involving Instex. This was an institution called the Instrument in Support of Trade Exchanges. The acronym is Instex, and it was created in 2019 by the leading governments of the EU and the UK. The reason they created this is because during his first term as president, Trump illegally withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA. He tore it up in violation of international law, and he reimposed sanctions on Iran. Again, those were completely illegal sanctions. And the Iran nuclear deal not only involved the US, but also Europe. So in response to Trump's illegal sanctions on Iran, Europe created Instex, and they did one transaction in March of 2020. It was a totally symbolic transaction to show that the institution worked, and they sold 500,000 euro of blood treatment medication. This is at the beginning of the pandemic. There was tons of media coverage of this, and Europe said that they were standing up to Trump, but they did a grand total of one symbolic transaction. And then what happened? They shut down Instex at the beginning of 2023 after just 4 years of pretending that this was a real institution. This is just one small example of why I'm very skeptical of all of the hyperbolic rhetoric claiming that Trump has ended the Western alliance and Europe is going to be independent of the US. Also because, come on, we've heard all of this before, back when Trump was president the first time. And back in 2018, there was a famous photo that went viral of Germany's leader, Chancellor Angela Merkel, arguing with Trump at the G7 summit. And people in Europe said this was the end of the Atlanticist alliance. And in fact, Merkel and Macron called for creating a, quote, real, true European army, end quote. That was in 2018, nearly a decade ago. Where is the real, true European army? It was just rhetoric. Again, I've talked about how European political leaders love to issue strongly worded statements. They love to focus on rhetoric, but not action. We need action, not just words. Another great example of this was this historic speech that France's banker turned president Emmanuel Macron delivered in 2017, announcing a new initiative for Europe. Back in Trump's first term, there was tons of discussion in the Western media of the ambitious plan to save Europe, how Merkel and Macron were going to save Europe and pursue a path of strategic autonomy. That was the term everyone was using at the time, strategic autonomy, European strategic autonomy. Yet what came out of all of that? Nothing. In fact, as Europe was talking about so-called strategic autonomy, it became more dependent on the US than ever, to such a degree that in 2023, the major think tank, the European Council on Foreign Relations, which is funded by multiple EU member states, they published a white paper titled The Art of Vassalization, talking about how the proxy war in Ukraine had further increased the subordination of Europe to the US empire and how European countries were vassals of the US empire. So again, I know I'm being redundant here, but this is why I'm very skeptical about this narrative that Trump has ended the Western alliance, and after Trump leaves office, it will never be the same again. That's what we were told during Trump's first term, and then Biden came in and made up, and the EU completely subordinated itself to the US, and the EU became even more dependent on the US than ever before. I'm not saying that this is exactly the same. Today, I talked about some of the small changes that have been happening that over time, in the medium to the long term, could lead to Europe being a little more dependent. Like, for instance, if Europe does significantly improve its relations with China and the trade agreements with India and Mercosur in South America, those are significant developments. I'm not trying to downplay them. But what I am stressing here, and this will be the last note of my analysis today, is that Europe is so extremely dependent on the US in so many ways, militarily and in terms of security, in terms of technology, economically, financially. It's going to be very, very difficult for Europe to actually pursue a path of strategic autonomy. Now, in terms of my view, I think Europe should try to do that. It should try to be more independent. It would be good for Europe, and it would be better for the world than this current situation where European governments are largely just the imperial lackeys of the US empire and go along with whatever Washington wants. But if Europe is actually serious about pursuing strategic autonomy, this will take much more than words. It will take concerted action. It will take strategic planning by governments. It will take a lot of investment over decades, not just a few years when Trump is president and then a Democrat comes in the US and they just reverse everything. We're talking about a transition that will take decades. So maybe in the medium to the long term, this is a possibility, but I'm very skeptical in the short term. On that note, I'm going to conclude. I am Ben Norton. I want to thank everyone for
because, well, I'd need 3 times the length of this monologue even to begin to do justice to the explosion of feces, human, political feces, which has occurred since the dropping of not 3 million, they lied about that as they're lying about everything else, but 2,700,000 pages. I wonder what was in the other 300,000 pages. I wonder what was in the other 3 million pages, because they had 6 million pages at the beginning of Pam Bondi's revelations. But the revelations that have emerged are simply devastating to the entire credibility of the Western political media and business class. They're all in it. It's one big dirty club, and you're not in it. And thank your lucky stars for that. For the secrets that have tumbled out of this latest dump, and I use the word advisedly, a sewage dump, the revelations that have dumped on us are truly breathtaking. We're talking about male rape. We're talking about female rape. We're talking about child rape. We're talking about child impregnation. We're talking about male sodomy of drugged victims. We're talking about president after president of the American Republic accused in FBI documents of raping men and women, boys and girls. We're talking about murder. We're talking about cannibalism. We're talking about the eating of human flesh sacrificed in satanic rituals. And it's all in the...
Now that's what's on tape. That's what's on tape. I tell you, it was way more deeper than just underage girls and things of that nature. Way more sadistic and satanic.
Epstein files. Now, where does one begin with a dump like that? Well, let's start with the royal families. The British royal family tonight is in ruins. Its credibility was never great, not after the way that now King Charles treated Princess Diana, the mental torture that he inflicted on her, his marriage to the equine so-called Queen Camilla. I say so-called because I was in Parliament when we were solemnly and bindingly guaranteed that Camilla, if given permission to marry Charles, would never be queen. But routinely, she is now introduced as the Queen of England. He was bad enough. But his brother, Andrew, is now, I think, on the point of being prosecuted, certainly being prosecuted in the United States. And Keir Starmer's call on him to go and face the music in front of the American Congress seems to suggest that this British government would not oppose his extradition if he refused to go. It's that serious. More pictures, more begging letters, more promises by Andrew's ex-wife, but still house partner, so-called Fergie, Sarah Ferguson, formerly a duchess, begging for money from a convicted child sex trafficker years after his conviction, calling him the brother that she never had, the promising to Epstein of complete privacy, in quotes, in highlights, complete privacy in Buckingham Palace. She was renting out Buckingham Palace on behalf of the royal family, a convicted child sex predator, a man who these files reveal was involved in espionage everywhere from Libya to Russia to Somaliland, all over the world, to Ukraine, who was plotting the murder of Vladimir Putin. That's the man at the center of all this. And some fools like to say it's all a hoax. It's all a Democratic Party set up. There's nothing to see here. There's millions and millions and millions of pages to see here. And on virtually every page, another politician, another magnate of the capitalist system all over the world is revealed to be just about subhuman in their appetites, just about demonic in their proclivities, in their predilections. And they talk to each other about it in writing, in emails, in messages. They talk about torture. They talk about killing. They talk about murder. They talk about kids. They talk about child trafficking. They talk about the impregnation in the last few minutes of an 11-year-old girl by the former U.S. ambassador to Mexico. Wow. It's breathtaking, and it keeps on coming. It's like a torrent of sewage. It's impossible to keep track of it. It's only when you go back and start to painstakingly analyze it that you see the sheer depth of depravity, of degeneracy. It turns out I'm the only politician in the Western world that isn't cheating on his wife, that's never sodomized anybody, never dreamt for a second of the depravities involved in these Epstein files, and they're all at it. The captains of industry, generals of industry, they're now resigning as these revelations come out. The royal families of Scandinavia, one of the princesses, she might even have been the queen, I don't know, a bicycling queen, but a queen, was impregnated by Jeffrey Epstein. And then he encouraged her, which she presumably did, to have an abortion. It is unbelievable. People are going to the FBI 25 years ago and testifying to the FBI with polygraphs and the rest that Donald Trump, the president of the United States, was raping young girls and smacking them across the face because one of them protested that he hadn't worn protection. He slapped her on the face and said, "You'll have to get an abortion," and he threw money at her for the abortion. This is the man on whom they lay hands. These evangelical maniacs think he's the son of Christ. Well, he is actually the son of Christ. His father was called Christ. But that's the place we're in. Bill Gates, that we were told for 25 years was a paragon of humanity. We were treated to his views on every subject under the sun, is revealed to be discussing with Epstein how he can get antibiotics to sprinkle in his wife's martini because he has contracted a sexually transmitted disease from a Russian prostitute and had presumably therefore passed it on to his wife. Gates, Diamond, all these magnates, plutocrats, they were all revolving around Jeffrey Epstein. And I hope it's not anti-Semitic to make this point. Is it anti-Semitic to point out the gigantically disproportionate number of Jews and Israelis and dual Israeli nationals in this farrago of filth that is revealed in these files? I'm asking on behalf of some Pakistani friends in England who are constantly being demonized as somehow uniquely involved in these kind of sexual shenanigans. But they're not sexual shenanigans. It's a big mistake to treat them that way. These are not sexual shenanigans. These are high crimes. These are crimes that should see these men locked up forever, for the rest of their lives, if not more serious and condign punishment. These men are accused of the gravest possible crimes, including up to and including murder itself, even cannibalism itself. It's almost impossible to comprehend. But the emails are there. They were all in correspondence with Epstein. They were all taking money from Epstein. They were all having sex before the cameras of Epstein. They were all desperate to get to his sordid little island, which was sold to the United States, by the way, by Denmark, about whom, if I have time, more later. But it's not just the royal families. The British Parliament stands ruined this evening by the conduct of the former ambassador of His Majesty the King to the court of Donald Trump in Washington, Peter Mandelson. Now, I have known Peter Mandelson for more than 40 years. He was called the Prince of Darkness 40 years ago. Yet Blair and Brown both put him in their cabinets, even though he had already been sacked from the cabinet twice before, 3 times. He was in the British cabinet, and then he was made a peer of the realm. Lord Mandelson, a seat in Parliament for life, so he could milk his contacts book, milk the august surroundings of the Houses of Parliament to impress his friends. And then Keir Starmer, who must have known everything that is in the Epstein files, except perhaps the financial details. He knew that Mandelson was a sleazeball, that's for sure. The dogs in the street in Westminster knew that Peter Mandelson was a sleazeball. He was the epitome of sleaze. He left a trail of sleaze behind him as he trailed his ermine cloak along the red carpets of the House of Lords. But the financial details are fatal. Fatal, I say to you. And fatal not just to Mandelson, but to those who put him in the House of Lords, and above all, those who appointed him as British ambassador to Washington. And not just the man who did so, Keir Starmer, formerly of this parish in Shanghai. The smell still lingers in the air. But the chief aides who encouraged and buttressed Keir Starmer's decision to send Mandelson to Washington, only to have to ignominiously sack him. Although he's still on an ambassador's salary, he's still in the House of Lords, and that is simply untenable. He must be sacked from the House of Lords, and Mandelson and Starmer must answer for their complicity in this affair. The financial details are staggering. The files reveal that Mandelson was encouraging bank bosses to threaten his own government, threaten them, mildly threaten them, because of his own government's plan to introduce bank bonuses. Mandelson, in the files, received 75,000 British pounds from Jeffrey Epstein at a time when he concedes that he was being lobbied by Jeffrey Epstein for changes in the tax regime in Britain. He says he has no recollection of a 75,000 pound gift from a sex trafficker already convicted. A sex trafficker gives you 75 grand, and the best you can say is you have no recollection of receiving it. Of course, if he did receive it, he must go to prison, because it's illegal for a minister of the crown to receive money, dirty money like that. He must go to prison because he didn't declare it in his registration of interest in the British Parliament, a criminal offense. He must go to prison for his husband receiving 10,000 pounds from Jeffrey Epstein when he was a cabinet minister and failing to declare this subvention, failing to declare the breach of the ministerial code, of which he is ipso facto guilty. But where's HMRC? Where's His Majesty's Revenue and Collection? Where are the tax authorities? Are they investigating at least £85,000 from Epstein to the Mandelson household? And if not, why not? They're certainly busy harassing small business people, publicans, car showroom owners, constantly about their tax affairs. What are they doing about Peter Mandelson? What is the Metropolitan Police doing about Peter Mandelson, who prima facie has broken the law multiple times, whilst a member of Parliament, whilst a cabinet minister, whilst a member of the House of Lords? What is the Metropolitan Police doing about that? What is Shabana Mahmood, the person who ordered that same Metropolitan Police to steal my phone, take my computers, hold me and my wife for hours at gunpoint in a British airport while Peter Mandelson drives a coach and horses through the law and makes himself fantastically rich in the process? It looks like Donald Trump has retreated from the Persian Gulf. The aircraft carrier Eisenhower, a floating coffin, if I ever saw one, has moved from the Persian Gulf and is headed towards the Indian Ocean. Does that mean the threat of war against Iran is over? Well, we're about to find out, because the sage that is Professor Saeed Mohammed Marandi is up next here on the Mother of All Talk. Nixon, radio talk show host, political analyst supreme, and a great friend of the Mother of All Talk Shows. Garland, wonderful to see you again. It's difficult to know where to start. It's been the mother of all weekends, hasn't it? The blizzard of revelations about your country, my country, Norway, Sweden, Somaliland, everywhere in the world appears to have been touched, afflicted even, by key individuals who turn out to have been really quite central to American political, media, and business life. Where are you on all of this?
Well, there are so many angles that you could discuss this from. One of them I think is important at this time because of what's happening. Maybe one of the biggest stories is what's happening in the markets right now, that this casino that's built on credit, on debt, on what they call speculation, but it's not really speculation. If I can invest $1 million and then I can take out an insurance, a credit default insurance against that $1 million, so even if no matter which way things go, I win, that's not speculation. That's a guaranteed win for the ruling elite. So I think when you look at the Epstein files and you see them discussing pilfering the money from the Libyan Sovereign Wealth Fund after Libya was overthrown, when you see Epstein talking with the Rothschilds about the economic opportunities after the Maidan affair, when they overthrew the government of Ukraine, you start to understand that when it comes down to all of these, frankly, demonic things that they're doing, that they are intricately connected. They're inextricably connected and linked to this global financial system that is coming unraveled.
Yes, I mean, the politicians and the media and the business class, from Bill Gates to Elon Musk to Jamie Dimon to the big banks, they're all in it together. How did that come about? Especially as these are the very same folks that are always telling us how much they love family values and how much they love the good old time religion. The hypocrisy unmasked is only one of the issues involved, but it's pretty spectacular, isn't it?
Well, it is. And that's the, I say this paradoxically, that's the good thing about Donald Trump that we've been seeing. And that is that, he's the mask off of this empire. This is, in fact, the post 1945, economic system and system of power that Mark Carney admitted to when he said, okay, we use different standards for right and wrong against our adversaries than we do against our friends. As we know from Rex Tillerson had a few years back under the first Trump administration, he had a cable that was sent to him that was similar. But Mark Carney came out and said, yeah, the whole system's rigged and we've been lying all along, but we benefited from it. Well, that's what we're seeing with the Epstein file, that beneath that system, the foundation of that system was a criminal group that had no morals whatsoever. It makes me think back to Ursula von der Leyen and these people saying, we lead with our values, we lead with our morals. Well, I noticed that Xi Jinping's name wasn't in there. Maduro's name wasn't there. I didn't see President Putin on the plane. So we see, the outcome is the intention. Your values are expressed by your actions. And we look at the people that they hated, that they wanted to overthrow, and their values are expressed by their actions. And look at von der Leyen and these multiple scandals in the EU and throughout the US. So it's the reality of this so-called liberal system being exposed to one and all.
So what happens next, Garland? Actually, I don't often quote approvingly Chuck Schumer, but he did take the trouble of counting the 3 million pages and discovered it was 2,700,000. So there's 300,000 missing pages in the 3 million batch that they said they had dropped. But there's another 3 million because they originally said they had 6 million pages. If this is the stuff they thought they could get away with releasing, God knows what's in the rest of the files. I could make a joke of it, but it's too serious to do that. God knows what's in the rest of the Epstein files. But is anyone going to be held accountable? What's the process?
Well, absolutely not, because what we're seeing now is the people that would hold them accountable are the people that actually created, were involved in these acts. So you can't ask the person who committed the crime to be the judge, jury. Often they'll say someone's the judge, jury, and advocate. Well, you're the judge, jury, advocate, defendant, plaintiff, all of the above. So I don't think they're going to come down on themselves for these criminal activities. But here's the other thing. You just brought up an important point, and that is, okay, we have a lot of missing pages here, which we know that terrible things are in. However, we have to look at that and say, well, then apparently there was a strategic nature to the release of this, that the things that were released for a reason. For instance, and people have speculated this, well, what if they're releasing a lot of bad stuff on Trump right now because they want him to attack Iran, and they're saying, well, if you don't attack Iran, the really bad stuff comes out next. So I think that they haven't given up on the Epstein strategy, in that they're still using it, saying there's a lot worse. There's other people. We could release it on you, and you. So to an extent, you could argue that the fact that they've released this much, and the fact that we know there's more really bad stuff, means that the more stuff is really more powerful, because now there are people shivering in their boots, people who thought they'll never release any of it. And now they're thinking, oh my God, if they let people know what I did, in my country, I'll get my head cut off. So that's the other thing, this strategic nature. One other thing that is important, and we have to be wary, there's some AI pics coming out. For instance, there's some pictures of like Mamdani's mother or something with Epstein. And what we're finding out now is there were no pictures like that in the actual files, that these are AI pics that were created afterwards. There was like a mention of her in an email. So that's the other part. People are going to take these things, make AI, for God's sake, they'll probably put like my picture and yours with Epstein dancing on the beach next week, for all we know. But that's the other thing. You have to verify the things that you find in there, and let's not just take it a priori that everything you see on X, or upscrolled as it were, that everything that you see on there is factual.
Well, speaking of X, Elon Musk, there's no other way of putting this. Elon Musk lied about the extent and the depth of his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. He alleged at the beginning, perhaps presumably not knowing that these emails, particularly these emails, existed, that it was Epstein that was constantly courting him, inviting him to the island and to parties and so on. Well, the emails seem to implicate Musk as being the guy who was chasing the invites, chasing the dragon, as it were. It's humiliating for him, but it's humiliating for the owner of Google that he gave $90 million to Melania, to Epstein's mate, to make a movie, Melania, which one person attended the premiere of in London today. An audience of one watched the premiere of Melania today, but that money came from Google. Bill Gates is revealed in the emails to be even more disreputable, sordid, degenerate than we already thought he was. How do these moguls recover their reputation?
Well, a couple of things, and I'll say this with Melania. It's the equivalent of Hunter Biden selling, something that looked like my daughter's fingerprinting, finger painting in elementary school for $900,000. It is simply, okay, Melania, okay, here you go. Here's $9 million for that. It's the president's cashing in on their status. It's selling access, things of that nature. And I think what we're seeing, and it's what we could expect with the ruling elite, with the political elite, is creeping admissions in law enforcement and in interviews and interrogations. There's a term, creeping admission. All that means is this: I will only admit to what you can prove. So if you say, well, Garland, were you at the scene of the murder? No. Well, we have evidence of you there. Okay, I was there. Did you know the victim? No. Well, we've got text messages between you and the victim. Okay, I knew him. So a creeping admission is, I'm only going to admit to what you can prove anyway. And so with Musk and the rest of these people, they're denying everything. And whatever comes out, once it's proven, they'll come out and they will say, okay, you got me on this, which just shows the duplicitous nature of these people. And I take it back to, how do they continue to argue that they're on the right side in Ukraine? How do they continue to argue that they're on the right side in Syria, that they're on the right side? When we look at the unthinkable acts that they commit, that the lies that they're involved in to the people, the constituents of their own parties, the people in their own countries, and yet they're trying to convince us that they're going around the world to save the protesters, to bring democracy, to stop some evil leader who's not on the Epstein list. So they're being thoroughly discredited. And the people who still believe this garbage about Ukraine or Venezuela or whoever it is, Iran, need to start asking themselves, how can I continue to be misled by people who have been exposed as moral degenerates and monsters?
Well, as George W. Bush nearly said, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. But these people have been fooled twice, thrice, 4, 5, 6, 10, 20 times. How often can you be fooled by a group of liars who are positively satanic in their public and or in their private behavior? That's the big question, isn't it? How do they keep these sheep down on the farm?
Well, that's the problem they have. Number one, it gets to a point where you have to be willingly fooled. It gets to a point where, in order to continue to believe this, you just have to say, I don't care. I'm just going to go with the story. And the other part of it is, I think that's one of the reasons we're starting to see like these federal officers start to show up in the streets. We're starting to see National Guard in one city, ICE in another city, beating and shooting and doing all kinds of terrible things to people that push back against the system. I think they understand that the game's coming apart. This thing's unraveling. I think they understand that dissent will increase, particularly, as I said, people should understand that right now this market thing is really bad and it's not going to get better. It's going to continue to unravel, and dissent and protest will rise. And I think one of the reasons we're seeing the actions that are being taken in Minneapolis will continue to grow, because they understand that as people become unhappy, as people start to push back, the government will send in their goons to put down the dissent. And of course, leading into the next election, where clearly the current political class would take a thrashing, they need an excuse to stop that, to put it on hold, to get more control under of it, things of that nature. And I think that's what we're looking at.
I mean, you mentioned the markets a couple of times. The contrived collapse in gold and silver this week, the utterly, ridiculously inflated stock market, bloated by debt and by your currency has fallen 10 or 12% in a single year. The dollar is tanking. The economy described by Trump in ways which nobody in the real America can even begin to recognize. The sense that things are coming apart, the game coming apart, as you just put it, with the November midterms looming. Does Trump survive this, do you think? I mean, he doesn't look a well man to me, and the Amendment 25 or some other method of removing him must be in the minds of the ruling elite in the United States, because, well, he's stumbling to disaster.
Yes, and of course, I think they need a patsy. They need a reason to get out of it. You know, I don't believe that Donald Trump is making a lot of these decisions. I don't believe that he has the authority that most people think that he has. And as an example, go back to COVID, and we were told, you know, when the market started crashing in October of 2019, COVID conveniently popped up, and then they were able to say, oh, we've got to print all of this money to deal with COVID, but it was really for crashing markets. 2 weeks ago, some people connected to the Bank of England used aliens. They came out and said, well, the aliens are coming and we'll be told about the aliens and therefore the market will crash. I don't know how the aliens would crash the market, but for some reason we were supposed to believe that. And now, if you think about it, unfortunately, sadly, and horrifically, I might add, if they were to attack Iran and the Straits of Hormuz would close and the market would tank, well, there you have it. It wasn't that the market was about to tank anyway or was in the process of tanking. Now you have a reason. Well, it wasn't. If the Iranians just hadn't closed the Straits of Hormuz, they don't have to admit that the system as it is constructed is set to make bubbles and burst. So it kind of scares me a bit that they may start a war with Iran to give them excuse, since they kind of flew the alien flag up a little bit, as they say, and no one saluted. So they decided we got to go in another direction. And it is perhaps they want the Straits of Hormuz closed so they can have an excuse for what's already started now. It's kind of like what happened in COVID.
You had a bank collapse this weekend, didn't you? It's the first bank collapse of 2026, and it's still January.
Yeah, and we had the canary in the coal mine about a year and a half ago, which was SVB, Silicon Valley Bank. If you remember, there were two banks that collapsed a while back. And when they looked into the things that they were doing, I'm not going to get into it, but it was the usual financial chicanery that caused them to collapse. And of course, during the Biden administration, and of course, they were both bailed out. And I think that was the canary in the coal mine. What we're starting to see now is that these banks do not have the finances to cover their debts, as do, neither do most of the corporations. And I think we're seeing the inevitability, to be frank, of 2022 when they seized the Russian assets. And at that point, very quietly, a lot of people around the world started exiting the dollar system, feeling that they were uncomfortable holding their money in Europe, holding their money in the West. And I think that was the beginning of this. Now, there are a lot of other structural issues where speculative capital just can't work, but I think that was the beginning of the downfall, because I think people started realizing, even if they couldn't walk away right then, that they needed to get out of there. And I would argue the big discussion in Europe, where the Europeans were only stopped by, you know, a few courts from stealing all of the money, I think that cemented to a lot of people around the world, I got to get out of the dollar system. And I think that's a big part of what we're experiencing now.
I mean, whatever happened to auditing Fort Knox? Do you remember the Dodge and Elon Musk and Donald Trump? They were going to audit Fort Knox to see if all the claimed gold actually physically existed. And Germany discovers that they've got hundreds, I think 130 billion in gold. Where? In Fort Knox. Is it really there, Garland? Why would any self-respecting, big, powerful state like Germany keep their gold in America? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Bad news for Germany. It's gone. It's all gone. You know, one of the reasons I think that Denmark and some other big players or whoever it was, Denmark, I think, and other large players in Europe did not want to dig into the Russian funds was because they didn't want people to discover that not only had they stolen some of the Russian funds, but they've been stealing money from sovereign funds all over the world. And if anybody ever turns that rock over, and the people in Dubai and Singapore, et cetera, start coming in and saying, well, I got 20 million in there, I want it, that they'll discover that the money's not there. And that's the problem with precious metals right now, particularly gold, because people have been selling paper. People have been selling, you know, it's like selling deeds for lands that don't exist. And there are a lot of people who bought precious metals. They got papers that says they have precious metals, but it's gone. And if people start sniffing around the Bank of England in Fort Knox, they're going to find that money has been gone long ago. They'll have like a picture maybe of money in there, but of gold, but the real gold has been gone.
There's no gold in them there hills. Here in Shanghai, on the other hand, here in China, it's real gold, not paper gold. China in particular, but also Russia, have been building up gold reserves like Billio. And we went into a shopping area in Shanghai today, which sells beautiful premium gold with designs and collectibles and so on. There was a queue a mile long outside the gold shop in Shanghai, because there you get real gold. You leave with the gold, not a piece of paper that says you've got gold. Isn't that remarkable how gullible people are?
Oh, absolutely. And I think we're going to find that a number of these companies in the US that were selling gold, even on the market, that if you don't have the real gold in your hand, you got nothing. And that's the nature of speculative capital. The truth is, for all of the talk for or against Bitcoin, Bitcoin's real in this way, from this perspective. They don't pretend that anything exists in the real world. They say it's only what will somebody willing to pay for it. It's as good as the next guy that'll buy it. Well, the truth is, if you own faux gold, if you've got gold paper and there's no gold, or a lot of these other stocks where you have a company that's virtually out of business, living off credit, but the stocks are paying well, effectively you have Bitcoin, or worse, at least Bitcoin's not a debt. Some of these companies you buy stocks from, it's so leveraged that they're, billions of dollars in debt, and you think you're holding positive paperwork. So I think that's what we're looking at, kind of the Bitcoinization of stocks, where they're not really worth anything. So we're getting a crash, and maybe that's why they dropped Epstein now.
Let's go over some of the most bizarre claims found inside of the Epstein files, shall we? Now, some of these are verified or speculation. Some of them are not true, but we're going to go over them anyway. And let's start with probably the most, I think, bizarre of the entire thing, and that is accusations of eating humans. This one here, this accusation is that this is graphic, and you just if you got a weak stomach, but this is claiming that Bush Sr. and Jr., I believe, raped African American males, and that there were individuals then eating feces from human intestines, and there was some like ritualistic sacrifices going on. Okay. Told you this was going to be bizarre. Okay, this is what the email says. Subject, interview a purported Epstein victim. I'd like to add a few other points disclosed by the purported victim while on this yacht he witnessed. So this is a victim, a purported victim, talking to law enforcement, saying African-American males have, so he witnessed this, African-American males having sex with white blonde females, all of whom were bleeding during intercourse. He was a victim of a type of ritualistic sacrifice in which his feet were cut with a scimitar, but left no scarring. I don't know if I'm saying that right. On the yacht, he witnessed babies being dismembered, their intestines removed, and individuals eating the feces from these intestines. He was also raped by George Bush Sr. Victim disclosed he was escorted to the FBI building by Michael Moore, who is the creator of True Pundit, described by multiple online sources as a conspiracy-driven news website that attempts to paint the FBI in a bad light. So I think that's a different Michael Moore than maybe the one we're thinking of. Moore has a criminal record as a result of an FBI investigation. Let me know if you want to discuss the former FBI agent that called this into the head office. Thanks. And then it says, I didn't realize Bush raped him too. And the response was, he has more to tell us too, he said. So I think it was, I don't know if he was accusing both Bushes or just the older Bush, but okay, bizarre. But I want to bring your attention to this. This was an old video. This is of a model, Gabriela Rico Jimenez. And in 2009, 21-year-old model Gabriela Rico Jimenez, who was reportedly at a elite event in Monterrey, Mexico, was recorded on camera freaking out. Okay, and I'm going to show you the video. She's making statements, including they were eating humans. And so she was going on and on saying they're eating humans. And this was at this elite event that she went to. They said, well, she just seems to have mental health issues. But now with these other accusations coming out in the Epstein files, accusations of people eating people, let's just go ahead and take another look at this video. Okay. So she's saying they eat humans. Yes, I knew about the murders, but now they're eating humans after she went to an elite party. It gets weirder. Nicki Minaj then tweets this out, and she says, your favorite artist has been practicing rituals in a satanic cult where they take babies from other countries and mutilate and kill them as a form of blood sacrifice to their god. You see, when your master is Satan, you must constantly shed blood. However, the jig is up.
Talking about Jigga, man, Jay-Z.
Who is she talking about? I mean, she says your favorite artist has been practicing rituals. Is she talking about somebody specifically, or is she just saying probably your favorite artist because chances are high, and that they're all basically a part of a satanic cult? People have been pointing out for a long time that these concerts from a variety of different artists tend to have symbols that are known inside of satanic circles. So it's bizarre. I mean, it sounds really, really insane. Sounds completely nutty, but I don't know. I mean, weirder things have happened in the world, I guess. People do weird things. I mean, it's hard to imagine. It's hard to wrap my mind around this as being real. It just sounds like, okay, yeah, these are mentally ill people making claims, but I don't know. I mean, what if it is real? And then here we are just acting like, wow, that can't possibly be real. I mean, this kind of stuff has happened. We have documented instances of children sacrifices. That has happened throughout history in many cultures, many times over, where children were sacrificed for gods, or cannibalism. I mean, these things have happened. So, I mean, we can't really just discard it and say, well, no, it can't be possible. I mean, why not? Why can't it be possible? I don't know. Here's another claim inside of the Epstein files that was quite interesting. A guard claimed that Epstein was smuggled out before his death. A lot of people have said the dead body that we saw, which, by the way, it's weird we even saw a dead body. You know, they leaked the picture of Epstein after he was found dead. When else do you see that? I mean, we don't really ever see that. So it's almost like they wanted us to see it. So maybe there's more legitimacy to this claim than not, because we do have a picture of Epstein. And then people were pointing out that doesn't look like Epstein. And I'll show you those photos. But this individual anonymously posted on 4chan the morning of Epstein's death, August 10th, 2019, claiming he witnessed weird happenings at the prison before Epstein's death had been identified. And now he's been identified in the Epstein files. So it turns out that this guard is Roberto Grijalva. He's an officer at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York. He has been identified as the anonymous prison employee who posted on 4chan claiming Epstein left his cell Friday evening shackled in a medical wheelchair, while at the same time an unauthorized trip van arrived at the prison, which he believed took Epstein away the night before news broke of his death. Both parties want you to believe they're working for the people, but let's be honest, Washington is bought and paid for. Big corporations in Wall Street get bailed out while working Americans get left with higher prices, shrinking savings. Out of here. Weird things were going on. And, then they ended up saying, well, nobody really believed this guy, but let's just go ahead and look at the pictures of Epstein. He's saying that Epstein. So this is the picture that leaked. And when we saw this, people were like, oh, yep, he's dead. There he is. But then people pointed out, that doesn't even look like him. And here's a side-by-side. Now, this is a picture of Jeffrey Epstein alive that's been turned sideways, but you can see here the nose. People are pointing out that the nose shapes are different. One nose goes down. The dead guy's nose goes down. And Epstein's nose actually has a straight, his nose is straight and doesn't curve down. The nostrils are different. Many people pointed to the ears being different. Here, let me show you the ears, that just the shape of the ears are different. And now that we know who this guard is, this anonymous posting, and now that this has come out in the Epstein files of who it is, I don't know, do you put more believability into it? You can't really discount the fact that the nose does look different and the ears do look different. But then you'd think that, where would he go? You can't go anywhere in the world without people. How do you fake your death like that? And where do you go? And then what? I guess they would give you a lot of plastic surgery at that point and change your appearance entirely. That's what would happen, right? I would think so. Here's another claim inside of the Epstein files that Epstein is Mossad. This is what these letters say. CHS, remember, Dershowitz tells Alex Acosta that Epstein belonged to both U.S. and allied intelligence services. CHS shared phone calls between Dershowitz and Epstein during which they took notes. After these calls, Mossad would then call Dershowitz to debrief. Epstein was close to the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Barak, and trained as a spy under him. Barak believed Netanyahu was a criminal. Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the United Arab Emirates are allied against Qatar, Turkey, Iran, and Syria. So they're saying, they're claiming that they were Mossad. So that's the claim here, according to these email documents, that Trump has been compromised by Israel and Kushner is the real brains behind his organization and his presidency. So this originates from a confidential human source, which is this was a single informant providing uncorroborated information to the FBI's Los Angeles field office. But, sounds pretty believable. Alan Dershowitz even said on this show, he said directly that he had been working for the state of Israel longer than I'd been alive. So pretty believable if you ask me. Let's see what this claim is here. This is Epstein basically admitting to be Mossad. He's interacting with Ehud Barak, who was the former prime minister of Israel. And Epstein asks Ehud to clarify that he is not Mossad when he goes to talk to people. So he says, hey, Jeff, are you going to be in London on Thursday? Best, Ehud Barak. And Jeffrey says, unfortunately not, but you should make it clear that I don't work for Mossad. And Ehud says, yo or I don't know what that means. And Jeffrey says, that I don't, smiley face. That you don't, smiley face. Sounds like you maybe do. Okay, this picture was found inside of the Epstein files. Now, this is a weird one. Here's a dude in his underwear and a t-shirt holding something, some sort of a, I don't know what that is. It doesn't look like it's in a binder or something because it's too big and also it's kind of floppy. I'm talking about the black thing there, guys. And then there's this woman. A lot of people said, oh, that looks like Meghan Markle. You know, we don't know who this woman is, but it is very odd that there's a man standing there in his underwear. And more odd is that someone took a photograph of this. If somebody is sitting there taking a picture of this, like, why would they take a picture of this? Who would you allow in the room with? Why would you be in your underwear in a room with somebody who can take a photograph like this? That's kind of weird. But it turns out this person here spotted in this picture is Peter Mandelson. Peter Mandelson is one of the most powerful people in British politics. He is one of the most powerful people for the Labour Party. And that is who that is. He's now resigned after not only this photograph came out, but also there were some accusations that came out in the Epstein files that he's been implicated in the files, discussing sensitive documents that he leaked to Epstein. He gave him basically confidential information that he was not supposed to give. And he also apparently was being given a lot of money. Epstein made $75,000 in payments to Mandelson in 2003 and 2004, and another 10 pounds to his partner in 2009. So this guy was being paid off by Epstein, this Peter Mandelson guy, and clearly hanging out with Epstein a lot, leaking information to Epstein. And what's interesting about Peter Mandelson is he's one of the staunchest supporters of Israel. Surprise, surprise, surprise. And that is the point of the Epstein files that everybody is wanting to know about. It's not just about the pedophilia ring and holding men accountable for their disgusting behavior. It's about how all of us have been held hostage by this foreign policy blackmail. And Peter Mandelson is one of those people. I mean, he should be going to jail just for what he did, leaking confidential information and whatnot. This should be serious. But a lot more people need to be going to jail. But this is, I think, a classic showcasing of what many of us are afraid of when it comes to the Epstein files. And that is that this was a blackmail operation to compromise our politicians. And he is a prime example of that. Okay, this email here, one of the most bizarre claims found in the Epstein file, or this is just a bizarre email. Jeffrey Epstein writes to someone, "Where are you? Are you okay? I loved the torture video." What? And this was from 2009. And this person writes, "I'm in China. I will be in the US second week of May. Sent from a BlackBerry wireless device." Now, there are some speculations online on who this might be. Some were thinking, it was an Israeli official. Some were saying maybe it's Lindsey Graham. Some said maybe Netanyahu, but Netanyahu was in Israel meeting with the Chinese in Israel in Jerusalem, not being in China at that time. Lindsey Graham was there at that time, I think. I think when we did the research on that, some people are saying John Podesta, and that there were claims of John Podesta. There was conspiracy theories. They always say conspiracy theories that had circulated around about a torture video in John Podesta. So those are the claims. Yeah, I'm just telling you the claims, but this email is real. So what is this torture video? What I hate about this is that they redact these names. Like, why redact this from Jeffrey Epstein to someone? This email's real. So tell us who it is. It's a real email with a real person. You don't need to protect their privacy. This email's real. So show us who was delivering a torture video, you morons in the FBI. Give us this information. This is what we want. Redacting this. Oh, I love the torture video. Like as if no, everybody wants to know who the hell sent Jeffrey Epstein a torture video. Don't you think we should know this? Instead, they redact it. This is what's pissing us all off. All these redactions, and then they don't redact the victims. They only redact the perpetrators, the people who send torture videos. That's who they redact. Unbelievable. This was another one. People looked at this and they thought that this was a bank account that was owned by Jeffrey Epstein. And on it, it says that the name of the bank account is Baal, Baal, which is it's a Canaanite deity, like the devil. Basically, it's a devil deity. And so they're saying, oh, Jeffrey Epstein even named his bank account after the devil. But it looks like it might have just been a typo, and it should have been bank name, but instead they wrote Baal name, and then next to it says Wachovia Bank. So it's possible that that's just a typo, but just wanted to show you some of the explosive claims that were found that Jeffrey Epstein named a bank account after the devil. And maybe he did. Maybe that's not really a typo, but it's like, we've got to insert the devil's name in order to make more money, or, some sort of weird devil thing, some sort of satanic thing that I don't know about because I'm not a devil worshiper. Here's another claims that have been circulating online. Really convenient, but people are trying to say, Putin's name was found in these files like 1,000 times. And actually Epstein, this whole blackmail ring was for the KGB and for Russia. That's who he was really working for, is now what people are saying. This was Putin's puppet, that he was Putin's financial advisor, according to some of the documents, that he was talking to Putin, meeting with Putin, having very casual meetings with Putin. I mean, it's possible. Look, I think that if this guy was running a blackmail operation, my guess is if he wasn't loyal to the state of Israel, he was selling his blackmail to whoever would buy it. And a lot of countries would buy it. So yeah, it's possible that he was also operating as a KGB asset. Many of us haven't really thought about that. I mean, we all figured Israel, probably CIA and MI6, right? But sure, why not the KGB too? Why not? If you could make a lot of money, which Epstein was clearly making a lot of money, then maybe that's exactly another really weird thing in the Epstein files. This is a Norwegian princess. Mette is her name. Princess, what is her full name? Princess Mette Marit. And she's with her son there. Her son is Maurice Borg Hoiby. And in the Epstein files, what's really bizarre is that Princess Mette had asked Jeffrey Epstein for parenting advice. But the parenting advice she asked for was, she asked, is it inappropriate for a mother to suggest 2 naked women carrying a surfboard for my 15-year-old son's wallpaper? Yeah, it's inappropriate because that's just like bad mothering, but also, weird. And then it's even more weird that you would ask Jeffrey Epstein if he thinks it's inappropriate. Jeffrey Epstein wrote back with mothers should stay out of that, leave it up to him. What's really weird about this son, this is how bad I'm just going to say it. She's a bad freaking mom. I'm sorry, but if you're going to put wallpaper on your kid, 15-year-old kid's wall of 2 naked women carrying a surfboard, and you're hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein all the time, yeah, your kid's probably going to end up screwed up. And guess what? Her kid, Maurice Borg Hoiby, now faces 38 criminal charges, including 4 counts of rape. He's on trial, starts Tuesday, tomorrow. It is the biggest scandal in Norway's 120-year royal history. He is facing charges of rape, domestic violence, just really bad guy. 38 counts of this. And it's rocked the Norwegian royal family. He's not the blood son of the crown prince. He's the stepson. But yeah, you know what? Your mothering skills are actually to be questioned. Not going to lie. Another bizarre thing found in the Epstein files, an email from Melania Trump to Ghislaine Maxwell 2 years before she married Donald Trump. So maybe the conspiracy theorists are right about Epstein introducing Melania to Trump, that maybe Melania, I don't know, maybe she's a honey trap, who knows? But Melania Trump emailed Ghislaine Maxwell. She says, "Dear G, how are you? Nice story about JE in New York Mag. You look great in the picture. I know you're very busy flying all over the world. How is Palm Beach? I cannot wait to go down. Give me a call when you're back in New York. Have a great time. Love, Melania." So much to be discovered in these Epstein files. So much weirdness. So much just corruption, dysfunction. All these terrible things that we thought would be in the Epstein files are in the Epstein files. But the worst part about it is no one will go to jail. No one will be held accountable. Nothing will happen to any of these people. And we will just have to accept that we live in a society where the rich and powerful can literally get away with murder and rape and kidnapping and all of these terrible things that are being accused. And worst of all, selling our country's soul and blackmail and selling our country's secrets and killing people in the battlefield for their pleasure and their gain. The world hasn't changed much from the days of the corrupt monarchs, has it? They just rebrand themselves in a different way, but it's all the same, unfortunately.
30th, 2026, the Department of Justice released over, I think it was 3.5 million pages of the Jeffrey Epstein documents. But buried in that release is an internal FBI email. I think it was from August 28th, 2019. And you're not going to believe what's in this email. And let's just say it kind of proves the whole premise of this video correct. But we're going to start with that and work our way backwards. So in this interview, I'm just going to read it because I don't think there's any room for speculation. And some of the things in here are too hot for YouTube. So I'm going to have to blank out some of the words, unfortunately, but that's the nature of this. The subject line of this email is interview with a purported Epstein victim, a male victim. And he described what he witnessed on a yacht. What did he describe? Well, if you follow this channel, you probably already know because we've been talking about this for a long time. And we're not the only ones, by the way. This is something that has been, let's just say, suppressed in the mainstream. They like to paint this picture as totally false. There is nothing factual about it, and people who bring it up have something wrong with them. Except that couldn't be farther from the truth. And we're going to prove that in this video. So what did he witness? What did he witness on that yacht, that fateful day that these FBI agents are talking about in this internal email? Well, he witnessed, let's just say, babies being...
Wait, what do you say? Don't say it.
Don't say it. They witnessed babies that were being unalived, and pieces of those were removed from them and consumed. Let's just say that, all right? And guys, I just want to be clear. I'm not saying this actually happened. What I'm saying is this is in the Jeffrey Epstein emails. So whether or not this happened, you be the judge. I'm just presenting to you what's in the emails. But it doesn't stop there because this man, this victim, described it as a ritualistic sacrifice. He even said that his own feet were cut with a scimitar. And guys, here's the crazy part. Again, I'm not saying whether this is true or not. I'm just saying it's simply in the files. This man, he named George H.W. Bush. And we know he was in Skull and Bones, and he's been accused of being in, let's just say, involved with some pretty shady things. So whether or not that's true, that's up to you. But the FBI agent's written response to his colleague says something like this. He said, I didn't realize Bush him too. And the fact that he used the word too, the FBI agent used the word too in this email, in my opinion, it indicates that there were others that were implicated in this, and the FBI knew the names of those other people. Now, why those emails aren't released with this batch, who knows? And, this whole new batch of Epstein emails, it doesn't really prove too much because, again, a lot of the stuff is totally redacted. There's whole black pages, and there's a lot of stuff that's just mysteriously missing from it. But with over 3 million files released, with over 3 million documents released, I think it's going to take a while for people to go through it and to really dig up the true meat of this, right? So where am I going with this? Well, I found something extremely interesting, a documented event that took place halfway around the world in Australia. And this event seemingly links together what the Epstein files talk about with what the media denies even exists and with what people and with what whistleblowers have been saying is true for a long time, right? What am I talking about? Well, in November 2025, Australian police arrested 4 men in Sydney for what they called, and guys, I'm quoting directly here, for what they called a, quote, international satanic child ring. Now, this investigation is called Strike Force Constantine. It remains active today, right now, as you watch this video. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's not a cold case. It is an active case right now. But here's the thing. The official narrative that they want us to believe anyway, is that this is just mass hysteria. It's the satanic panic. It's been exposed, debunked, and discredited decades ago. And the only people that believe that now are conspiracy theorists. But what if the story that they say, what if that story that the whole satanic panic thing was just debunked and discredited? What if that's not the whole story? What if the whole story is far darker and far more, let's just say, evil than the mainstream media would like people to believe? Now, before I get into what we're going to be talking about in this video, I'm going to show you a clip. This is a short clip. I think it's like 2 minutes long. It's from an interview I did with a man named Russ Dizdar. Now, those of you who watch my channel regularly probably have seen this clip before, but I want to insert it here because it's extremely relevant to this conversation, what we just talked about, and what we are going to be talking about. So watch this clip with Russ Dizdar, and I'll see you afterwards.
Well, see, first of all, it's normal when you go to the Old Testament, Moloch and the Baals, they wanted the children. Explained to me by Satanists because it's a higher level of blasphemy to God, against God. It's and for some reason the demons love bringing that kind of harm. We look at a child and automatically we're going to protect them, save them, guard them, whatever it takes. They look at a child, they'd eat it alive, they destroy it, they'd torture it. Got to remember that's their nature. And so if they can show more of their nature to a defenseless child, they love that. That's why some rituals are called demon revels or satanic revels. The younger the child, and here's exactly what dark undergrounders have said to me in rituals. The younger, the better. And we never kill them right away. We prolong the torture. Why? Because we have to raise the energies, the terror, the fear, and then little by little letting some blood out, because blood is and all that torment. It's like, think in terms of rats and garbage. Smelly old garbage draws the rats. A ritual with all that torture, with all that pain, ultimately prescribed by the demons in the first place, it draws them. And once they begin to open the blood gate, that's what they attach to in the context ritual. Then when a child or a human is, that's when the demons are released to the practitioners. So it's all about their unsatiable hatred of God. Anything they can do to harm humanity, harm innocence as an attack on God in a sense. And there's no question in their nature, they don't shed a tear. They don't have any mercy. So they'll harm, and they love that as part of the entrance to come into the side.
It really is unbelievable to think that there's people that can do that without any, I mean, like you were saying yesterday, how do you not smack him in the head with a 2x4? You must have.
There's times.
He's just like,
well, there's some people right now. It's like, good news is we're working with some people, law enforcement people that are going to go after him, and praise God if they get jailed. I even told some of them in Pennsylvania, if they go to jail, praise God they go to jail. That because we realize this, like that, Satanist ritualistic pedophiles, they don't stop until they get stopped.
For many in the United States and Canada, it's much more convenient. It feels better to deny that Satanism is rampant in American Canada. It feels better to deny that we have young people by the millions now captivated in something that can make killers out of them. And yet, my friend, right now, there are over 12 million teenagers and younger children who are now involved in the occult in one way or another. And denying it isn't going to make any difference. See, whether you believe in occultism, whether you believe that Satan has power, whether you believe that Satan can give you the things that he's promising these kids, that's immaterial, my friend, because they believe it.
So if you're under the age of 40, you probably learned about the satanic panic the same way that everybody else did, right? It was just nothing but hysterical parents. It was overzealous prosecutors and fundamental religious people who were, ruining the lives of innocent people, saying that they were involved with these things when they really weren't. But here's the thing, guys. There are pieces of evidence, there are documents that nobody has seen. Well, I should say people have seen, but most people haven't seen. And I would say that the majority of the public They have never seen this. They've never heard about it. And when they do find out about it, they're shocked. They can't believe it even exists. 4 years before the FBI published their famous debunking of, satanic ritual abuse and satanic panic, all this stuff, they tried to debunk it, right? 4 years before that, what happened? The United States Department of Justice released a law enforcement training manual called what? Those of you that know, put it in the comments. It was called Satanic Cult Awareness. Now, one of the contributors to this document was a detective with the San Francisco Police Department. I think it was the first recognized law enforcement specialist that was into the occult, not into the occult, but specialized in the occult, I should say, in occult crimes. And the thing about this document too, the United States Defense Investigative Service, I believe it is, they reviewed it and they approved it. And not only that, a bunch of other career investigators, they teamed together to write this document. So it wasn't just one person pulling all of this stuff out of thin air. No, this was a coordinated effort to gather intelligence, to gather information, and to piece together things that were kind of fragmented and bring it all together into one unified document so that people like, i.e. law enforcement officers who may or may not come in contact with these types of crimes would be better equipped to handle them based on, what's in this document. And the document also goes on to say that the crimes, they're vicious, they're revolting, and they create fear in whatever community they take place in. So think about this, right? So what does this mean? Think about this. It means that the federal government, it trained the police across the country to investigate satanic ritual crimes. Officially, on the record. Okay, this isn't a conspiracy theory. It never was, and it never will be. The fact is that they're trying to cover this whole thing up in a way that discredits it. So whenever somebody might bring up the claims in the future, they're laughed at in the same way that they used to laugh at the UFO people. Like I said, this DOJ manual is pretty long, Satanic Cult Awareness. I think it runs like 47, 48 pages, something like that. It's a pretty long document, and it lists different types of abuse that these Satanists do to their victims. Physical confinement in cages, sexual torture, forced witness of murder, brainwashing, near-death experiences that are used as control mechanisms. So basically, psychological torture, fracturing of personalities, like all the things that people have been saying that they've been doing forever, right? And this document also lists 32 different occult-related homicide clues for crime scene investigators, so that when they're investigating a murder or investigating whatever, if they come across these clues in a specific way, it might point them to say, hey, this isn't just, a random murder. This is a ritualistic murder, and it was done by a group of people. And understand this, people. This wasn't theory. This was training material. Yet the mainstream media says it's all fake. All right. So there's a shift. There's a disconnect. Something changed. And it was in 1992, I think, was the year where everything did change. And there was a FBI special agent by the name of Kenneth Landing, I think it was Kenneth Landing. Yeah. He published this report. So, and what was his conclusion in this report? Well, I think his conclusion went something like this. There's little to no corroborating evidence for organized ritualistic satanic abuse, something like that. He chalked it all up to false memories, contaminated interviews, and like mass hysteria. And Newsweek, they ran with it. New York Times, they ran with it. All of the major media companies ran with it. And they propped this whole document up and said, look, satanic panic, it's not real. This whole thing is fake. It's all just mass hysteria. You guys can all calm down now. These things actually didn't happen, and go and, watch football. All right. Distract yourselves.
The FBI's 1988 Uniform Crime Report indicates more than 18,000 murder investigations during that year, and 26% of those murders were listed as bizarre or ritualistic. In that same year, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children listed more than 9,000 unresolved cases of missing children. The National Clearinghouse on Satanic Crime in America estimates 50% of the cases of missing children and bizarre murders may be linked directly to satanic and other occult organizations. It is common for these groups to kidnap their victims, usually infants and young children, from hospitals, orphanages, shopping centers, or off the streets. Others live and die without a trace. This is because some children are born to cult members and later killed, so there are no records of their births or deaths. Inmate interviews conducted by Professor Al Carlisle of the Utah State Prison System show that lawbreakers are heavily involved in the occult. There may be as many as 60,000 human sacrifices per year in this country, according to Professor Carlisle, and there is a distinct correlation, he says, with these human sacrifices and the high number of missing persons. This is because some satanic groups dispose of their victim by dismembering the body and cremating the remains, eliminating any possibilities for identification. Members of satanic and occult groups come from all walks of life. Many are highly intelligent individuals. Michael A. Aquino, senior initiate and founder of the Temple of Set in San Francisco, is also a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army Reserve. He's received a top-secret security clearance to attend the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. Anton Sandor LaVey, founder of the Church of Satan, was once a circus lion tamer. These charismatic leaders, and many like them, seek out others who have a high degree of intelligence.
So anyway, guys, what do you guys think about this? What do you think about this document? Do you think the Epstein document, do you think it's legit? Or do you think it's just some crazy guy who came, walked into like an FBI station and was like, hey, I have some dirt on Epstein. Let me write a report. Because I guess that's theoretically possible too. It's possible that that's just, some random, not credible person who's just making stuff up. But I ask you this, if it's not credible, if this document, the one from the Epstein files, is fake, if it's just, the musings of a crazy person, well, then why would the FBI put it into the Epstein files? Why would it be a classified part of the Epstein files that just got released? Why? It doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't make sense at all. If it was fake, they would probably just laugh when the guy left. They're not going to file this report. They're going to laugh at him, and they're going to ridicule him when he leaves. So, bottom line, guys, what do you think? Put it in the comments below.
Coffee. Follow me.